And good evening. I believe we are ready to begin our deliberation, so the commission will be in order. And let's begin with reports from the Diocese. Let's begin with Ms. Russell.
So I attended something related to the Fontaine Smart Scale project, though I don't think it was actually a Fontaine Avenue Smart Scale meeting. It was a meeting of the LITEC working group and discussing, LUPEC, I'm sorry. LUPEC is the Land Use and Environmental Planning Committee, and discussed was the Fontaine Avenue Smart Scale. Councilman Mitchell, I think you also attended that meeting, so maybe you understood more than what I took away from it, which was not too much, except for that there is some discussion design of the Fontaine Avenue streetscape, and the question is to what degree the project could be altered before it would require another review by VDOT. It sounded like the group was going to be circling back to VDOT to kind of get an idea about this and then have an idea to move forward. I went back and checked the timeline of when this Fontaine Avenue streetscape goes before council, and the timeline previously proposed was January, February. So maybe they're making some tweaks to the design, but it was confusing to me.
There was supposed to be a grant award, some MOP grant award. Wasn't it supposed to happen like this week? Or do we know that
board meeting was supposed to be happening.
Yeah, but I don't know if they were, I don't know what happened. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. I did take some notes on it, so I'll help you out with that a little later.
Okay, that's all I have.
Mr. Stolzenberg.
I guess we had two meetings since we last met. First, so Place still did not meet last month. Still sort of in a hiatus, trying to figure out what that committee will become, but it will be meeting later this month to talk about ways to pick up pieces of the West Main Streetscape. And then two meetings that did happen. One was the Mpo Tech Meeting, where let's see, the big interesting thing is that they're doing bike ped counts at several intersections in advance of major intersection improvements to those places to see how they change over time. There's also talk about a second crossing of the Rivanna River near the Free Bridge. And then I think those are the main things from that meeting. Then we had a TJPDC meeting where, let's see, the rent and mortgage relief program has transitioned from one that's run through the PDCs, then through, subcontracting nonprofits, to one system for the whole state at deval.com, DEVAL.com, to sign up for the intake. So it should be interesting to see how that changes, maybe in some ways for the worse, now that it's not being run through local nonprofits. Major other event that happened in that TJPDC meeting, we fired our executive director. We heard he was going to quit, so we got rid of him. And now Christine Jacobs is the new interim executive director of TJPDC. That's all I got. Thanks.
Okay, and welcome, Ms. Dowell. Mr. Reverend Heaton.
I have no report from our last meeting. It's been a traveling time for me, so I have no report.
Oh, welcome back. Ms. Dowell, welcome. Do you have a report?
Good evening, everyone. I do apologize for my tardiness. So the Ridge Street Task Force met on January 27th, and basically during this meeting, we wrapped up some of the ideas that had been expressed about how to do some traffic calming in the neighborhood and what was and what is not actually possible. One of the biggest things is that we got out of it is as much as people want certain things in the neighborhood that it may not just be feasible from an engineer's point of view. Like one thing that was a hot topic was adding shelters to the bus stops for our riders, and then even possibly adding a an additional stop. But the way that the roads are constructed is just mission impossible to even try to consider adding shelters in the neighborhood, and we even looked at on both sides of the road. Most of it is because it couldn't be ADA compliant, and some of it is because then we start talking about getting into private property. So our next meeting next month, we will be finalizing what the committee plans to do with the final funds for the task force. Thank
Good.
you.
Mr. Rice, it looks like Bill is in the lobby with his hand up. Bill Butler.
Sure, 1 second. Bill, you are permitted to speak.
Great, thanks.
Hey,
Hey
welcome,
guys,
Bill.
for some reason I didn't have the link to the meeting, to be a panelist. Like, so I was, yeah, so that's all right. I don't really have much to report.
Great. Then we will move on to
Chair
Mr.
Mitchell, I just elevated him to panelist, so he might
Okay,
have
good.
something more to say.
Great. We'll move on to, where was I? We were Lyle, Mr. Yates.
The Housing Advisory Committee discussed meeting, but chose not to. We need a housing coordinator to do our work. Looking forward to having a housing coordinator to do our work.
Okay. Mr. Lindra. You'll need to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Attended 2 meetings since our last Planning Commission meeting. The first, the Board of Architectural Review met on January 20th. We had 7 certificate of appropriateness applications. All 7 were approved, no deferrals or rejections. And then the Tree Commission met February 2nd. Here we spent the first part of the meeting getting ready for the presentations we're expecting at our next meeting from the NDS and Public Works, and discussing the kinds of things that we want to talk about at that meeting and go over. The Education and Advocacy Subcommittee reviewed initial planning for a neighborhood tree planting project that is tentatively planned for next fall, if COVID allows. Then the Arbor Subcommittee also did review its plans for a virtual Arbor Day celebration in April. Our Codes and Practices Subcommittee is preparing for updating the city's zoning ordinance by researching tree ordinances in other cities. And then lastly, we discussed the proposed CIP plan and its changes relative to the urban forest allocations, and you'll hear more about that later. Thank you.
Thanks. So as Ms. Russell mentioned, the LUPEC group met twice in January. And all the conversations were around Fontaine. So Ms. Russell, the point you made 3 meetings back that, we weren't thinking about Fontaine holistically, it was heard. And now we've got the Water and Sewage Authority, we've got the county, we've got UVA and the city beginning to think about the things that we want to do with Fontaine. There were presentations made by all these stakeholders, and 3 or 4 things leap out at me that I just want to make sure that we're aware of. The Fontaine Research Park, that's going to grow from 580,000 gross square feet to 1.1 million gross square feet in the next 10 years. The Urbana Water and Sewage Authority, they've got mains running up and down Fontaine, and they've got mains running through the research park. So that's something we'll need to keep in mind as we do the improvements that we're looking at, and as UVA does the improvements that they're looking at. Because the Water and Sewage Authority is looking to expand the footprint of their main and to do some improvements on the footprint as well. Kyle talked a little bit about the expense of running sidewalks all the way to the park. And that's going to cost us about 1.5 million bucks. We don't have the money to do that, so we're not going to do that. We're not likely to do that. But as UVA continues to do the expansion and do the work that they're doing with the research park, it is likely that they might be able to help out a little bit with getting some of the sidewalk infrastructure built. The point that Ms. Russell was making, it relates to where Fontaine meets the 29 and 250 bypass. What they're looking to do is work with the Department of Transportation to do some improvements in that area that will enhance the safety and increase the traffic throughput. And one of the ideas that they're thinking about is a divergent diamond. So that would be my report, and I'll now defer to Ms. Creasy.
Sure, I've got a couple of things. First of all, there's going to be a Planning Commission work session on February 23rd. So that's the fourth Tuesday. From 4:30 to 7:30, we'll be focused on the future land use map, and materials will be posted next week on the 16th. NDS has welcomed Allison Fincham to the city in a role as the ADA coordinator. So we're currently in the process of recruiting for the building official, a GIS analyst, and then a planner position. So I just want to put a shout out to numerous staff who are taking on additional duties as we recruit for these open positions right now. And we have reached out to the county staff concerning the rescheduling of the joint planning commission work session that we had scheduled in January. So we're hoping to be able to work to get that back on the calendar. And that's all I have.
Right. Oh, with that, I think we are ready to open it up for our first public hearing. So this relates to matters to be presented by the public that are not on the formal agenda. So if you'd like to chat with the commission about the work that we do, now would be the opportunity to do this. We will have a separate public hearing for the CIP a little later on in the meeting. So I will turn to Mr. Rice and ask if there's anyone in the lobby that would like to speak.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. And at this time, yes, if you would like to speak to the commission, I ask that you click the raise hand icon. You'll be called upon in the order of hands raised. Once your mic is enabled, please unmute your mic and you'll have 3 minutes for comment. Chair, I see no hands raised.
Righty, then we'll move on to the consent agenda. I believe the consent agenda is in order, and if it is, my belief is accurate. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I so move.
Is there a second?
I second.
We have a motion and we have a proper second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Yeah, unanimous. Ms. Creasy, unanimous approval. And I only see one counselor. So I think unless there's something else we can cover, we will be in recess until 6. Is there anything else we need to discuss? Right?
I'd just like
Yes.
to add, I said deval.com. That's apparently a shipbuilding website. It's applications.deval.us. And I sent a message to the chat with that link, which apparently only works for you guys. So, you know, related to our discussion in the pre-meeting, while I agree that sending things in the chat is super useful, especially links, even if you select 2 attendees and panelists, because chat is disabled for attendees, they can't see any of it. So while I still think it's useful just to point out things to each other when we need to, when it's something that affects the content of the meeting, I think it's just something to be wary of, that the public is not able to see that sort of thing, unlike, of course, when we share our screens.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right, we will be in recess until 6. All righty, good evening. And I do believe we now have a quorum. It's Lloyd, Heather, Cecina. Yep.
And Michael.
We've got a quorum. Vice Mayor McGill, is council in order?
Yes, Chair Mitchell. Council is in order.
Very good. All right, we are now about to begin our second public hearing. This one relates to the capital improvement program running from 2022 to 2026. So tonight we're being asked to consider the program that has been developed by staff. There are at least 4 hot potatoes in the program that is in front of us. The first and the most important is what is outlined in the documents we've got is not sustainable. The budget cannot be achieved without significant revenue enhancements, tax and fee increases, significant. That suggests to do what's in the program that we've got in front of us. So as we are deliberating and putting together our recommendation for council, keep in mind that if you want to add something, you're going to have to also recommend that we delete something. The second hot potato is the fact that West Main Street is not included in the documents we've got in front of us. Now, keep in mind that phases 1 and phase 3, those have already been approved and they've already been funded through previous budgets. But this document is silent as it relates to phase 2 and phase 4. The third hot potato is the parking garage, the downtown parking garage, where we've allocated $8 million to develop that. And again, that's important to do and to keep in mind, to find a way to deal with because of the commitment that we've got to the county. And the last hot potato is the $50 million that's been allocated for the school reconfiguration. We really don't know if $50 million is going to get the job done. There are many who believe that once the consultants have finished the work that they need to do to walk us through the work that needs to be done, the number could be north of $100 million. So keep those things in mind as we begin listening to public input, begin listening to staff input, and then begin our deliberations. What we want to do tonight is not micromanage the numbers. We don't want to get involved in an Excel spreadsheet exercise as we've done in previous years, and that I've been guilty of leading us through. But what we want to focus on is helping council understand what we believe are the priorities for the capital improvement program. So with that, I believe we have a presentation from Ms. Allen. Ms. Allen. Oh, one more thing before you present, and I can't hear you. So before you present, just so that everyone knows, the public knows, we're going to do this a little differently. We're going to have a presentation, and then we're going to open it up for public input. And then we're going to have a Q&A. The board and council will have the Q&A with Ms. Amel. And then the board will deliberate, and then the board will begin crafting a recommendation to council. So that's how this is going to flow. Forgive me, Ms. Amel.
No worries at all. Thank you. Good evening, commissioners, council. Joe, if you could bring up the PowerPoint, please. I'm Chrissy Hamill. I'm with the budget office. Ryan Davidson and I are at the helm of the budget office. And so we're here tonight to present you with the capital improvement program. Next slide, please. So we're going to start off with just a general description of what is a capital improvement program. Again, it's essentially a 5-year financing plan that is put together on an annual basis. In terms of an official approval, each year the council formally adopts the year 1 of the plan, and years 2 through 5 remain a projection or a plan in the future. Number 2, the projects usually cost $50,000 or more that are put into the CIP plan. They're generally non-recurring and non-operational, so sort of one and done types of things. And they typically have a useful life of more than 5 years. Next slide, please. So last week we met with council, and again, we presented this slide. And as we mentioned to council, and as we'll mention to you, we were very intentional to call this a draft. The draft that is put before you, this 5-year plan, was an attempt to signify the idea that we have listened to council, we've been meeting, we've been talking about this at least through November about what this CIP would look like in a post-COVID situation, but also moving forward. And one of the things that we try to do, which is highlighted here, is to make sure that we are funding what we have heard council say are top priorities. So in the order of funding here, education over the 5 years is the winner of the 3. Transportation and access, and then affordable housing are the top 3 categories. This is a 5-year summary of totals. If you're interested in actually seeing the details behind it, you can find that at charlottesville.gov/budget. And there's a work session tab that you can click on, and you'll find documents throughout the budget development process there. And there are further details that describe what's actually contained in these categories. Also, as Commissioner Mitchell highlighted for you, some of the big things here is that there were no additional dollars added for West Main. There was a $50 million placeholder put in FY 2025 for the school reconfiguration project. Next slide, please. So as we have these work sessions, we typically talk about bits and pieces in isolation, if you will. And so the point of this slide here is to keep in mind that what we're talking about tonight are 2 very small slivers of the big pie that we call the city budget. One piece is the debt service that would be required to fund the CIP, and then also the cash contribution that is sent to the CIP to cash fund projects. So when we look at the pie of the entire general fund budget, as we make these pieces bigger, other pieces have to get smaller to maintain the full picture. So just to keep in mind, even though we talk about big dollars and big numbers here, it is just a small part of a lot of other things that we do to fund core services and other projects that aren't CIP related. Next slide, please. One of the other things we frequently talk about when we talk about capital budget is selling bonds and our bond rating and what the implications of that are on our bond rating. And so I wanted to take just a second to talk about this. The city is very fortunate to be AAA bond rated. We are actually one of only 7 cities in the entire state that is AAA. That is the top rating that a locality can receive. I believe there are 18 in the state of Virginia, cities and counties. 7 are cities, and we're one of those. And so what is a bond rating? It's basically an independent agency that comes in and rates us on things that are more than just our numbers. They look at our management policies, they look at the economy, they look at the financial part of it, and then they also look at our outstanding debt. So one of the things that they're trying to assess is what is our ability and our willingness to repay the debt. So as we take on more debt, what are we willing to do to ensure that we're making those payments? The city has been AAA bond rated from Moody's since 1973 and Standard & Poor's since 1964. So we have a long history of our AAA bond rating. One of the benefits of a AAA bond rating is that it allows us to borrow money at the lowest possible rate because of our good credit. So that means that we end up having more dollars that are available to go to capital projects instead of dollars that are being used to pay back interest. And one of the other factors is that a AAA bond rating is also attractive when we look to economic development prospects. Again, I touched on the 4 factors that a rating agency focuses on when they come in to do this review: our economy, what are our demographics, what is our employer base, management, what are our policies, what are our procedures, and what do we do to make sure we achieve our budgetary targets and adherence to financial policies. And then finally, what does our outstanding debt look like based on when compared with what our future needs and obligations are. So next slide, please. This year with our CIP process, quite frankly, we didn't have an opportunity to have much of a process, mostly because of the financial impacts of COVID. We also, for 21, passed a budget that did not cash fund any projects. And so many things were deferred, as we know, with the budget last year. So we went into this budget process knowing that we are, our revenues are still down. And so we looked to this to be a level funding process, meaning that we started with the plan that we put out for last year and asked departments for no more than one request, and only really if that was necessary. And so what came out of that for the draft that is before you is basically just a few highlighted changes, which we've already noted. West Main Street, there was $4 million that was removed. There was $100,000 deferred for new sidewalks, mostly because there's already available funds there. There are also funds for sidewalks and other smart scale and other projects that are happening. And then there were a few deferrals for things like traffic signs, and we added $500,000 back to paving and milling, largely because there were a lot of deferrals that were required last year to that. And so this is an effort to try to catch up. Housing rehab dollars, they were deferred in FY21. And unfortunately, with this current draft, they are not in again. But we are willing to look at the CAF process, and applicants can apply for rehab under that through that competitive CIP process. And then finally, the Friendship Court project. The total dollars are not reduced, but when we went back and looked and spoke with the folks managing that project, we were able to reallocate those dollars and spread them out. So there was a reduction there. And then there was a request that was put in last year for a citywide fee study, and given the impacts of COVID, that was removed. So those are essentially the only changes that have happened from the draft that was put out in FY21. That's essentially the only changes that have happened in the plan that we're proposing or have submitted here for consideration for 22. So next slide, please. With all of that, this was a slide that we also shared with council in the work session last week. Again, this was a draft that tries to focus on council's strategic priorities or key priorities. This draft does not attempt to speak to projects on any level in terms of is one better than the other, but it looks to if the school reconfiguration is an important priority for council, how could we best do that? So therefore, we added the $50 million placeholder. And the big key takeaway, as again, Commissioner Mitchell noted, affordability. The plan as is not affordable without significant revenue enhancements. Can't say that enough. One of the scenarios that we put out last week talked about a scenario in which there was a 10-cent tax increase to make it affordable. But there are other ways to do that, but it require, excuse me, some reallocations, perhaps. And I guess one thing I want to stress here is that by reallocations, i.e. one of the reasons for not committing new funding to West Main, is that if that is an option, it does not help with the affordability issue, but it does help with the capacity issue. So those dollars could be reallocated to a different project, but they're already baked in the projection. So simply reallocating does not make this more affordable. Again, we also talked about the fact that the future needs, if the 50 million stays in for schools, it will limit future CIP in terms of abilities to add new projects or new initiatives for quite some time, unless there's a bunch of cash that can be added. And then of course, at any time you can add cash funded projects. The other thing is that even with the additional tax revenues that were put in, there is a healthy fund balance in the debt service fund that we have been using to buy down some of these increases in debt service. With this plan, and even with the 10-cent tax increase, the current proposal would deplete all of those funds within the next 6 years. Next slide, please. So again, as we presented this draft to council, again, not to make a value judgment or statement on any project, but to simply say, if this is how you want to move forward, what would be the recommendations? And so what did we put in the draft? Again, the $50 million is put in for the school reconfiguration project in 2025. The West Main Street additional funding was removed. The $18 million that was previously approved in prior CIPs remains intact and would be available. The scenario we presented, again, looked at a property tax increase of roughly 2 cents per year beginning in FY23. The point here being is that in order to make this affordable, not only do we need to look at revenue enhancements, but we need to start doing that now. And we didn't want to do that in 22, but it is something that would need to be considered starting in 23 if we're on the same time scale with the 2025. Again, one of the options we also offered is, in addition to tax rates, there are other things that we can do. The school formula would be one of those that could be considered. And then essentially, once the projects start, if we move forward with this plan, it's one thing to start or to budget for $1 million project or a $10 million project. And if it slides one way or the other, we have some room to adjust, especially when we're not spending all our capacity. But in this scenario, we're looking to a scenario where we're actually would be spending all of our capacity, using up all of our debt service reserves. And that would mean that future councils or commissions would also be limited in what could be recommended or added to future CIP budgets for several years. And so with that, that is essentially what we have put forward and what is the story that's kind of behind this draft. And we'd be happy to answer questions at this point that you may have.
And what we're going to do is open it up for public hearing, and we will then come back to you with questions after we've got some feedback. Our questions may be informed by what we get from the public. So we are now open for public hearing. Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. This hearing is now open to public comment. If you'd like to address the commission during this time, please click your raise hand icon and you'll be called upon in the order of hands raised. Once I call upon you, you will have 3 minutes for comment. Our first speaker is Peter Krebs. Peter, you're on with the commission. You have 3 minutes.
Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Good evening, Planning Commission, council, members of the public. Tonight, I'm here to talk about potatoes. Well, actually, I'm here to talk about the CIP and some complicated issues it contains. There are two capital projects that are garnering a lot of attention, or I'll speak to two of them. West Main is a complicated project that has been in the works for a long time. In addition to making more safe and more pleasant our Main Street and a road VDOT currently rates as a top 0.1% corridor of safety concern, it replaces water, sewer, and gas lines, numerous ADA violations, replaces broken sidewalks, out of compliance push buttons, outmoded lights, overdue repaving, and more. Something needs to be done about West Main. That is not optional. And we have to be real. It will be expensive. But can it be cheaper than the current plan? We don't know, and the answer might be no. But while we wait, I think the current proposed freeze on funding for West Main makes a lot of sense. But you should avoid reprogramming the funds allocated in previous years until we have a satisfactory answer to that question. I think likely what will make the most sense is to proceed with the two phases that are funded and look for alternatives to the other two. But we'll see, and we'll have to give it some time. The other item that concerns me is the proposed new parking garage, which has not been subject to much, if any, public process and seems counterintuitive given the times that we are in. Not many localities are investing in more parking right now, and none that share our ambitious climate goals or our commitment to a healthy, walkable community. I fought to keep the courthouses downtown, and I speak all the time about shared wins with the county. We clearly must honor our commitments, but I also think we can get much more value from our capital dollars and this prime marquee site. A much more creative mix is needed, and frankly, a more open design process that is more reflective of our values and our community goals. To summarize, I would love to see all four phases of West Main funded, but that might not be feasible. But some major work will need to be done. The memo I sent lays out some options. On the other hand, it would be very dismaying to spend $10 million on a simple parking garage, which is counter to so many other things that we're working on. We need a more creative solution and a much better return on the investments and sacrifices that will be required. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Our next speaker is Kathy Galvin. Kathy, you're on with the commission.
Welcome, Kathy.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Do you see me? I can't see me.
I don't see you, but
but you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry for the time. Thank you very much. I'm Kathy Galvin. I'm 712 Lyons Avenue resident, and I'm speaking mainly about West Main, but we'll talk a little bit about reconfiguration. So the draft affordable housing strategy calls for more multifamily housing at densities that can drive down unit costs in locations close to transit and jobs. Before the automobile, such densities from 17 to 34 dwelling units per acre in compact walkable areas on small lots and low to mid-rise buildings were typical. Gross densities today, however, are 1/10 of these historical norms due to sprawling, large lot, low density suburban development patterns enabled by the vast distances that can be crossed by automobiles. Transportation is now a prime contributor to greenhouse gases and human fatalities due to speeding. But you can't go back to pre-war densities without going back to pre-war walkable street networks. We learned that lesson 20 years ago when the pedestrian-oriented improvements for West Main were never implemented, even as its zoning was changed to spur more intense development and foot traffic. West Main Street today is one of the city's top 10 priority corridors for safety reasons. Since the pandemic, crash fatalities are rising due to more reckless driving on emptier streets, ill-equipped to handle more bike and pedestrian traffic. So why would we abandon our commitment to improving West Main Street now, when the need is now more urgent, especially to those who can't afford cars and already suffer disproportionately from fatal crashes involving walking? That's 18.3% for Black people versus 12.4% for white. How can higher densities be achieved without re-engineering our streets to accommodate more bike-ped traffic? Our goals are within reach on West Main. It's been the product of countless meetings and is one of at least 11 studies across 33 years. It does everything Peter Krebs says and more so in terms of accessibility, in terms of widening sidewalks, in terms of making it multimodal. Since 2016, it has been awarded $15 million in smart scale and revenue sharing funds for the first 3 phases. That's close to 40% of the total cost for all 3 phases. Do we turn down state money? If we do, how could we ever afford to re-engineer our streets to be less car dependent? Zero-sum games are divisive. Like West Main, the reconfiguration plan is a long-term capital project that transcends terms of office. But unlike West Main, which garnered state funds to drive down the city's $49 million obligation across 4 phases, the school configuration plan is apparently paid in one $50 million phase with no grants or revenue sharing. Why hasn't this been broken down into phases as first proposed by Maurice Jones years ago? Has the federal COVID-19 relief package been considered? Finally, failure to follow through has a cost. Please do not pit 2 initiatives that have been the product of extensive public engagement against each other at a time when the community cannot fully participate in the discussion due to COVID-19 restrictions. Please find a way to do both. Full disclosure, I voted for both as a school board member and then as a counselor. Work with Chip Boyles, who knows infrastructure planning, municipal budgeting, and state politics. Give him time to assess these decisions before a final choice is made. Otherwise, failing to stick to long-term capital project priorities that have been thoughtfully incorporated into an organization's ongoing responsibilities for over 8 years, like West Main, will mean that progress is rarely, if ever, achieved. As stated by the 2017 efficiency study, it will also lead to frustration and disappointment on the part of elected officials, staff, and the community. If a council and planning commission continually fail to execute long-term capital projects across different council tenures, capital projects take more than 4 years, then how can we hope to ever promote stable government in accordance with established governing norms within a work environment that empowers city staff as per the commitment City Council made to the public on January 14, 2021. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy.
Our next speaker is Matthew Gillikin. Matthew, you're on with commission. You have 3 minutes.
Welcome, Matthew.
Hi, Planning Commissioners. This is Matthew Gillikin. I live at 726 Orangedale Avenue. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that I'd like to see you all consider as your priorities in this capital budget. One thing Ms. Galvin didn't mention in her comments just now is that just 2 years ago, she told me in an email that this was going to be a $30 million project to redo the West Main streetscape. That was what the project was pitched as. That's what council voted on up until this past year. Suddenly it's at least a $50 to $55 million project with an indefinite timeline. We have no timeline to the renovation of the middle school, it would seem, if we decide to go in on West Main streetscape. I think the PIP projects actually do kind of pit against each other. We only have but so much money, as Ms. Hamill just told us. And then when you factor in other things like maybe affordable housing and what we should be spending on that, we really have a conundrum. I personally would like to see money spent on schools and affordable housing for our capital projects. I have 3 small children, 2 of them are in elementary school right now. I'd like for them to go to I think you might have just heard one of them. I'd like for them to go to a middle school that isn't falling apart at the seams. I really would like you all to rethink the recommendation of funding for the parking garage downtown. The current design is a disaster, and according to the numbers that I've been shown by Chris Ingles' budget projections, that parking garage on prime real estate in downtown won't turn a profit for 25 to 30 years. That is just irresponsible beyond measure, beyond belief. And so West Main, let's scale it way back to something that works and is functional and fiscally responsible. the Market Street Garage, I mean, maybe in terms of our obligations to the county, there's a path where we need to put more parking there. That doesn't seem environmentally responsible to me, but let's go back to the drawing board. So I would encourage you all to not approve funding based on the current plan. And one little thing that I noticed is that was rejected. This is a small thing, but I think it matters. That was rejected in the KIP was to resurface the spray grounds in the city. And as someone who spends a lot of time in those spray grounds, I think that the couple $100,000 that's being proposed for that was not put on the proposed KIP is actually money really, really well spent, both in terms of providing an amenity that lots of our families in the city use, but also for safety. Those surfaces, as they get worn out over time, become much more slippery. And I've seen a lot of kids fall and get hurt. So I'd suggest adding that back into the KIP. It's a couple $100,000. It's not a huge investment, but it will have a big, big payoff. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthew.
Our next speaker is Jeffrey Fogel. Jeffrey, you're on with the commission. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, welcome. And Jeff, you are muted. Jeff, you'll need to unmute.
A rare time in my life.
Yeah. Okay.
People will want to know the trick. What I really want to talk about is taxes, because I think that we really need to raise taxes, and at a considerably higher rate than is being proposed by staff. And not simply for capital projects, but for operational expenses as well. We do not have enough money in the city to do what needs to be done. And secondly, we have an incredible opportunity here to make property taxes progressive. The CHAP program has to be fully funded and expanded so that people who cannot afford this increase in taxes will not have to be paying them. While the richer people in our community who've gotten away with really low taxes will have to pick up the slack in order to provide the kinds of services that people in town expect. So I would encourage you to increase the taxes twice as much as the staff offered. It's critical that we start to enhance and enforce the CHAPS program and fully fund that program, increasing the income limits as well as the values of the houses so that the lower middle class is not harmed either. There are many, many rich people in this town who can afford to pay more taxes, and we have the opportunity to make a progressive system that has not existed in this country. Most people in real estate taxes were set at, as you know, a flat rate. And those real estate taxes had traditionally been used to fund education. And of course, they become the most regressive form of taxation because they're set at the same rate for rich people as they are set for poor people. So we have that opportunity to change history and to supplement the monies that the city needs in order for its important capital improvements, as well as the important services that it wants to provide, but can't because of a lack of operational expenses. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Our next speaker is Peggy Van Yeris. Peggy, you're on with the commission. You have 3 minutes.
Welcome, Peggy.
Yes, I'm Peggy Van Yeris. I'm Vice Chair of the Tree Commission, and I'm here to support the tree planting budget in the CIP. That's our first priority. But first, I'd like to tell you kind of a sad story about our trees in the city. Our forests are declining and I'm going to give you 3 illustrations, quick illustrations of that. Since 2004, we have lost over 480 acres of forest of trees in the city. Now picture this. Start on 250 north, go down to the downtown mall in the south, go east to Meade Avenue, and go west to McIntyre Road. Think of that whole area. That's the area of trees we've lost. Number 2, every year we remove more trees, and these are large trees, than we plant. And of course, they're small trees. And number 3 is the $75,000 that is in the budget for tree planting won't even let us plant our community goal of 200 trees a year. Another thing I want to let you know is that the primary goal for the tree commission over the next really number of years is to plant in our low canopy, low income neighborhoods. These are our most vulnerable citizens. And as the science has pointed out, loss of shade, loss of trees is resulting in higher heat-related illnesses and higher energy costs for these people. So we're going to work with nonprofits. We're already talking with the City of Promise that's going to help us reach out to the neighborhoods. So that's an exciting project for us. I'd like to address, we had asked for ash tree removal, but we know you are incredible under budget constraints. So we're not going to ask for that now. But I want you to know that every single ash tree in this community over the next 4 years is going to die because of the emerald ash borer. In the city, we are treating our most important trees, and it's going to become a significant cost for the city. And we'll have more to talk to you about that in later years. The other thing I'd like to just point out 2 more things, the way you can help us. To City Council, we'd really like some help planting trees in Star Hill and 10th and Page. Those are our 2 lowest canopy neighborhoods. It's hard because we have to plant on private property, but we think that we can have a conversation with you about how we can use staff or materials or websites to help us reach that goal. The second thing I'd like to talk to the Planning Commission. There are 2 ways that you can help us with the urban forest. One, as you review development projects, look to save our existing trees. And also another thing you can do is be careful about waiving front yard setbacks. If there's no front yards, there's no trees. And guess what? We are just creating heat islands of the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Becky.
Our next speaker is Latonya Allen. Latonya, you're on with the commission. You have 3 minutes.
Welcome, Latonya.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. First, I do want to say thank you for your commitment to affordable housing. I currently live in Charlottesville, Virginia. My name is Latonya Allen, and I am a home buyer through Habitat. And I'm just here to emphasize on the importance of affordable ownership in our area. So here's a little bit of my story. I didn't grow up. I grew up in a single parent home. It was 4 of us, and we lived in the projects for what seemed like a lifetime. We went from the projects to an apartment complex and never into a home. So I never got to experience what it was like to actually live in or grow up in a home that I own myself. And so my husband, on the other hand, he, his parents were able to, have a home built from the ground up, which was awesome. So in saying that, like where we are now, we have 5 kids of our own, all different age groups. Oldest is 14 and the youngest is 7 months. And what we always desire to do, having kids, is to pass down something to our kids. And, our own home would be like amazing for us to just pass down to them and leave a legacy from our family to like different generations to come. So I'm just advocating on behalf of families who will come after me seeking this opportunity because, affordable housing is an issue, in our city. And I know that from experience, we just came from, a small 2-bedroom home, where we were forced out due to, the asbestos we had in our basement. So going from that to where we are now, which, it's a pretty penny to stay where we are now. And it's, having 5 kids and a family of 7, it's hard. We make it, but it is hard. And this is not our home, but we're paying a lot for it. So, affordable housing is, it's always needed and needed even more, and not just for the communities that have the money for it, but for communities like where we grew up in, like public housing. And, I'm pretty sure a lot of people don't want to stay in public housing for the rest of their life, but, we have to make housing affordable for ones who want to live comfortably and have kids growing up, in a home and not subject to statistics that, seem to carry, a lot of kids that are living in an environment like that. So I do want to say, affordable housing is would be a number one interest that I would love to see you all take part in. And, just thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Ernest Poku. Ernest, you're on with commission. You have 3 minutes.
Welcome.
Thank you, members. I applaud you for the good works you guys are doing. In fact, it's very, very encouraging. I've seen you guys are doing a very good job. And somebody like me, I'm a home buyer through Habitat for Humanity. My main objective is to see more people benefit from this housing, because one thing that is killing us is the higher rent that we are kind of paying. And we still have children too that we are taking care of. So if we kind of get a little bit less on this low income housing, and we can channel the rest of the money towards our children's education. And also we are willing, as a hard workers, I know people here are very, very hardworking. We are willing to do more. It doesn't matter if you guys can just increase the tax so that we can get more money towards, helping people to get a low income housing. That would be very, very effective. I know you guys are doing a good job. So my main aim is that you guys need to help us to come out of a little bit more money towards housing. And having said that too, I think the development of Charlottesville is doing pretty good. The constructions, you see constructions here and there. And my main channel is that we need to let those inspectors who go on the site, making sure that we are building at a good place, but not even cramping the whole city together at one particular place. Let's extend our arms so that Charlottesville will get a nice, landscaping and all kinds of stuff, so that our city will be very beautiful. Meanwhile, our city is good already, but let's do more to do that. And I applaud your good works. I'm not going to talk too long, but all what I'm saying is that keep on the good job. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ernest.
Our next speaker is Anthony Harrell. Anthony, you're on with the commission. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all tonight. I'm Anthony Harr. I'm the director for Thomas Jefferson Area Coalition for the Homeless. And earlier today, a letter was sent from the Charlottesville More Affordable Housing Coalition, focusing on affordable housing and this upcoming budget. And I just wanted to talk a bit about the CAF in particular, or the Affordable Housing Fund. First, also, I want to call out the planned investment in the current redevelopment efforts at Friendship Court and CRHA, which is critical. So thank you. And we also want to, and I also want to support funding and being available for the entire continuum of housing needs, from homeless services to low income rentals to affordable home ownership and rehab. And the current allocation of about $800,000 for the CAF for FY22 is a great start, but it is not enough to cover the need for other areas of the housing continuum that are needed to really address affordable housing in our community, such as permanent supportive housing, again, affordable home ownership and rehab efforts. And there's some significant projects coming down the pike this year in each of those realms, with opportunities to leverage several millions of dollars of federal, state, local government, philanthropic dollars towards development, and having more flexibility in the CAF to really make those happen is important. And one of those opportunities that I wanted to bring up and share with you all is something that TJEC has been a part of, which is a partnership to purchase and develop the Red Carpet Inn on Route 29. It's a really unique collaboration that addresses immediate needs for people experiencing homelessness, to be able to have non-congregate shelter, as it's called, which is essentially private rooms to shelter during this pandemic, which is a critical need. And in the medium term, so 1 to 2 years, that the existing structure will be able to provide shelter there, which is amazing. And then development would occur for permanent supportive housing by Virginia Supportive Housing, which would provide about 80 units of permanent supportive housing. And then further development would occur as well for affordable housing in general. So just market, no, not market, but affordable housing rentals on the site. So a pretty amazing collaboration between different organizations, PHA, Virginia Supportive Housing, TJAC, and the Charlottesville Affordable Housing, Charlottesville Area Community Foundation. So I just want to bring that up as one of the options that the CAF can support. Having that flexibility in there is important to really try to address those other types of needs along the continuum of housing needs. So thank you so much for the time to speak.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Mr. Rice, it doesn't look like there's anybody else.
If anyone else would like to speak on this public hearing item, please click the raise hand icon, or if you're joining us by phone, press *9. And we have Don Gathers. Don, you are on with the commission. You have 3 minutes.
Welcome.
Good evening, everyone, and I'll be very brief. I'm just hopeful and prayerful that in this day and age and in a modern society, what should be a civilized society, that we're not trying to decide or debate the necessity between streetscapes and schools. I hope that that's not the point that we find ourselves at. Rather, we're talking about beautifying a street or actually putting money into our educational system. I would much rather that we not even entertain the discussion at this time about parking or about what Main Street may look like or may be envisioned in someone's dreams in the future, because it won't matter if we don't invest in the schools. I believe that Mr. Krebs, the first speaker, said something about a return on the investment. And I can't find or think of a better return on investment than in our school children. So if we're looking for avenues and trying to decide where money should be spent, at this point in time, it certainly is not on streetscapes or street beautification or parking garages. We have too many other very large fish to fry, if you will. We can direct that money towards the school system. We can direct that money towards even more affordable housing. We can direct that money towards trying to solve the homelessness situation in our city that continues to plague us. And if necessary, put some money towards feeding our citizens. The beautification of a street or building additional parking has to be way down the list of priorities, especially now, especially during the pandemic, and especially when so many people in town are hurting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Don.
Our next speaker is Cliff Fox. Cliff, you're on with the commission. You have 3 minutes.
Welcome, Cliff. And Cliff, you just muted your mic.
Sorry.
You're back.
I would just ask that the city develop a fiscally responsible plan. As we're seeing with West Main and the schools, there hasn't been a coherent plan for reserves and replacement in place over the past decades. If it were, we wouldn't be here now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cliff.
Chair Mitchell, there are no other hands raised.
Right, well, then I will gavel us out of the public comment section and open it up to the commission to begin asking questions. And for the first round of questions, just go from left to right, and we'll begin with the university. Any questions from Mr. Palmer?
I don't have any at this point. I'll wait to hear what the other commissioners have to say, and then if I have anything, I'll speak up. Thanks.
Okay, Ms. Russell.
So I'll just start off with, a couple big talking points. There's been a lot of talk about West Main, and I think I'm interested in understanding what the minimum, well, first of all, there was some questions going back and forth today about whether or not we would lose committed funds or have to pay back funds. And I would think we would want to avoid anything that requires us to pay something back, pay back VDOT or Smart Scale. So, my big picture question is, what would be the minimum we could commit to meet obligations, possibly like Peter Krebs said, retain matching funds. I won't go into this, more of a discussion thing. I am also questioning why the $500,000 for rehab is not selected. I would think we'd want to be putting everything we could into our affordable housing program.
So, Ms. Russell, may I interrupt you for one moment? We're gonna have an opportunity to have a stream of thought and discussion after we do Q&A. So, do you have any direct questions for Ms. Amel or staff about any of the projects right now?
I don't know. I don't know. There was a question that was asked that was specific to the project that Ms. Hamill said that she couldn't answer. And so I'm wondering if and I think it was on West Main, if those staff people.
I believe there are a number of members of staff that are available to help with that. So what was the question? And we'll see if there's anyone who can help.
I guess I don't have any questions.
Right. Mr. Stolzenberg.
I think most of it was pretty comprehensively covered by email. I would like to follow up on my question about the revenue from dockless mobility or e-scooters and e-bikes. So we committed when we approved that program to redirecting the revenue to bicycle and pedestrian improvements. So in the email, staff said that there was in fact $33,000 of revenue in that account in the previous fiscal year, which is lower than we expect in the next fiscal year because the fees were waived for several months during COVID. So I guess my question is about the flip side of that. We have the revenue. Where is it going? I don't see it being put in the CIP as revenue. I see sidewalks and bike infrastructure getting reduced in funding yet again. So what's going on there?
And Ms. Amel, I'll have to let you be the traffic cop, and maybe you can direct that to the appropriate person.
I think Ryan was gonna take that.
Yeah, I can speak to that. When those dollars do not specifically go into the CIP plan in this way. There was because those dollars come in on a regular basis throughout the fiscal year. We have created the appropriations of those funds as they come in and as they are collected are automatically deposited into this account. And so there's not a need to reappropriate those funds every time we get a new check from those vendors. So they're going into that pot on a regular basis. So that much I can answer as far as the rest of that question.
Okay, so I can clarify. So we're, for example, supposed to put what is it for new sidewalks? It's $0 this year. So, all right, I'm not going to use that. For bicycle infrastructure, it's going to be $150,000 this year, right? And so, if we fund it at $150,000 and $33,000 comes in from this other source of revenue, does that mean there's $183,000 available to be expended?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, that makes sense. Second question, and this was sort of addressed by email. So in the street milling and paving account, we see a big increase this year to $1.5 million, whereas it had previously been projected for the entire 5-year CIP to be $1.25 million. I think we had only approved $1 million in FY20. That was the whole request. And so that amount has gone up significantly. That's $250,000. It's more than we're spending on these other programs. So it's due to increased construction and material costs, but what justifies the prioritization of that for the smoothest possible roads versus sacrificing some amount of ride quality in exchange for having safer roads that work better for all users?
So I just want to clarify your numbers a little bit, make sure I understand your question. In the 21 CIP, there was a total of $7 million over the 5 years allocated for milling and paving. And it's only, with this new version, it's up to 7.5. Is that the numbers you were referencing?
I guess I've been referencing against the FY20 CIP because that is prior to.
Okay, I don't have the 20 in front of me. We can certainly pull it up, but I don't think the 1.2 over 5 years was ever a correct number for milling and paving.
So I guess now would be the time where I would love to share my screen without objection.
Is there 2 points? Joe, would you please start the clock? Is there any objection to Mr. Stolzenberg sharing the screen? Seeing an objection, Joe, would you also please give Mr. Stolzenberg the ability to share?
Chair Mitchell, he has the ability to share. And was the timer for 2 minutes or 3 minutes?
3 minutes is for the short meeting. It's 5 minutes for the big meeting. So 5.
Thank you.
This is all I wanted to show. It should be quick. So this is the FY20 adopted budget.
Okay. So you're comparing 7.5 to 6?
Yeah, sure. I was thinking more on the 1.25 million a year to 1.5 million a year.
Yeah. I mean, there are costs associated with paving. They do increase annually. There has been some deferrals on those paving. And in terms of maintenance, this is just an attempt to get back on schedule, to keep in touch and keep on track with the scoring matrix that's currently being used. And I'm not sure if there's anyone else from Public Works on this call that wants to address that question, but that would be all. I mean, that's all I have as a response for that.
Thanks.
See, Mr. Brown, the director.
Because I'll wrap back around while you're thinking. I'm sorry, I interrupted somebody. I'm not sure who I interrupted.
I was just saying, I see that Mr. Brown, the director of Public Works, had his hand raised to respond further to the particulars of that question.
All right, Joe, would you let Mr. Brown in?
Yes, I just promoted him to panelist. He should be joining us shortly.
Mr. Brown, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. In response to the question, as presented by Chrissy, is that the situation, as I understood, in the previous budgets, the request for the resurfacing was higher, but because of budgeting necessities, that was reduced. But for the purpose of the increase, what we're seeing right now, we are experiencing increased costs in our operational costs and for construction costs as well. Therefore, that's the reason why you're seeing the increase requested. It's just to address those increased costs and expectations that we're going to encounter in the future.
Mr. Stolzenberg, you're muted.
Yep, got it. That makes sense. I appreciate that. So I guess my question then is, in light of those increased costs, what would be the consequences of dropping funding back down to previous levels, given that a small drop in funding for this program means a significant increase in funding for these much smaller but also very important programs for pedestrian infrastructure?
So if you begin to start reducing the costs or the amount that's being funded, what you end up doing is prolonging the inevitable. So if we reduce the cost, we're not able to do the amount of work that we've programmed. So that just continuously builds. And in the long run, that costs you more because you've put off that work. Our maintenance costs are going to increase, material costs are going to increase. So it's just going to continue to build and build as you put off what work is scheduled. So what we're trying to do is at least maintain a certain level of operational maintenance on our infrastructure. Also keep in mind that the roadways themselves are multimodal. They serve bicyclists as well. So if those road surfaces begin to deteriorate, we begin to get potholes and cracks, which also affects or has an effect on bicyclists as well.
Okay. I know at our last year CIP work session, I think we talked about a pavement quality index.
Mm-hmm.
Have we seen deterioration in our pavement quality index?
We haven't actually. We're planning to do another survey, additional survey this coming spring, an assessment of our pavement conditions, and that what you're referring to is a PCI, pavement condition index. And so we'll be evaluating the conditions of our paving in the upcoming spring, just to see where we're at right now.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Reverend Heaton.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a question about the state and federal funding of the entire project, and if in the revenue side of the budget, there are connections between specific parts of the improvements. For example, when we apply to get state or federal funding for smart streets, or if you were, is the application for that funding allocated to specific parts, like undergrounding the power lines? Is that a part of the state funding? Is that if we don't do that, we don't get the state funding? Is it broken down that way, and can we see that? Or is it all just very much up to our own municipality to decide where that funding goes? Because I can't see that in the budget, so I don't know if it's even a possibility to cut back on different parts that are not a part of this smart streets. So my question is it broken down income that is dependent on a specific part of that project, such as undergrounding the power lines?
So Miss Janicek is on the call and can answer your question specific to the project. I just want to make a point regarding your question as it relates to the CIP budget. We do show in many cases offsetting revenue, federal and state offsetting revenue. However, in this case, the dollars that you see that we've been talking about related to West Main are strictly the city match that would be required for the state and federal dollars, which would then be appropriated later once we're ready to, undergo those expenditures. You would have an appropriation that would go before council that would actually increase the expenditure budget with an offsetting increase in the state and federal revenue for the project. But the dollars you see in this budget that we're talking about, the 18 million or the 4 that was not put in, are strictly state dollars. I'm sorry, strictly city dollars.
So there's really no way for us to assess the consequences of withdrawing one part of the project, because we don't know what's tied to the state and federal funding.
I will let Miss Janicek answer that question.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. So when the city submits a grant application, we have to identify what we're going to do with the funds. So revenue share is a little bit more open-ended. That would be on phase 1 only. There are no smart scale funds on it. We have more of an open door to rescope that portion. Once we do a smart scale application, again, we're identifying what phase we're going to apply, what the project limits are, and then we identify what the benefits are that we hope to achieve with this funding. So we do have smart scale and revenue sharing on phase 2. And then we have phase 3, which is just smart scale funding, no local funding. Undergrounding, just so you know, cannot be, transportation dollars cannot be used for that, state or federal. It has to be city.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Ms. Dowell.
I don't have any questions at this time.
Mr. Soliet.
Oh, we talked about revenue. You've opened a door. I've got a few ideas. I'm remembering that the University of Virginia mentioned an interest in giving $5 million for West Main at one point. And hey, University of Virginia, increasingly a large landowner in the city, I believe they're the largest landowner in the city, pay no property taxes when they own the property, as opposed to the trust fund. Other college towns do what's called a payment in lieu of taxes. They'll say, hey, federal or state entity or nonprofit, here's the taxes you would have paid. We wonder if you would pretty please pay a portion of that this year to help us out. To my knowledge, we've never done that formally. Other localities do. I suggest that we could consider that if we haven't already considered that. Second question, have we considered asking the state for permission to do more kinds of revenue? I'm thinking mansion taxes, empty homes taxes, parking taxes, and land value taxes specifically, all of which I believe are illegal.
So in response to your first question, we do actually bill for a payment in lieu of taxes to UVA. There are state statute restrictions on what is eligible for that. And most of that property is actually in Albemarle County, not in the city of Charlottesville. So we do get a small amount that's billed annually for what is eligible. And that's, again, those are billed with property taxes. In relation to your question about new taxes, I guess that's more of a policy question that, certainly something that council could consider if they wanted to.
Mr. Lintrop. Right there.
I have a question in regard to the small area plan allocation. And it's, I guess, a question for us and for NDS staff. I'm not aware of a small area plan that has high importance and priority at this point. Are the other commissioners aware of anything, or NDS staff? Is there something queued up that is of high importance that needs a small area plan?
No, there is none at this point.
Okay, thank you.
What is what amount is budgeted for that right now?
$100,000 every year over the next 5 years.
So $500,000. Okay. The only question I've got is about the emerald ash. I think Ms. Creasy sent out an email suggesting that the infestation would be dealt with using Park and Rec's operating budget. Does that cover everything, or is it only the 32 trees that we deem, what was the word you use, best specimens?
So I believe Todd Brown may be on this call, the Parks and Rec Director. He can maybe answer this better than me, but my understanding is, to answer your question, it does not cover it all. I think this is one of those programs where, there's a lot of need, but we are basically triaging the most critical and working from that standpoint, given the limited funding. And Todd, if you're on, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else there.
Mr. Brown, you're muted.
Thank you. No, you're exactly right. I mean, the amount of money we have left over, we'll take care of the most dangerous trees first throughout the year.
And what amount of money do you have to do that? What amount of money have you dedicated to that?
That's hard to tell. I mean, you're running your 30,000, 20,000 between those two.
Okay, because you've got almost $2 million in your lump sum account. And I'm wondering if we could use some of that lump sum money to help with this infestation.
If you could, that also goes towards all our park facility needed improvements, courts, repairs.
Yeah. It's only $50,000 that I think the tree commission's asking for. And you're already going to deal with some of it. You're going to deal with 32 of the trees using separate funds. Yeah, again, something for us to think about as we begin deliberations. All right, let's go back around. Bill, any questions yet? Any questions for staff? And I don't see
no questions at this time. I did also have that question about the implications to the smart scale funding if the West Main Street was not funded or deferred or whatever. But I think that was adequately answered. So thanks.
And that was $500,000 we had in smart scale, right? Right, Jody? Whoever asked that, yes, $500,000. Ms. Russell, any new questions?
I was kind of hoping for a little more clarity, and maybe it came from Sunshine earlier today on the question around public housing not getting as much funding as requested. And the response from staff was that there were no LIHTC applications for new projects in 2021. So my question is that expected to change and increase in the future? I'm not sure who would answer that, but that just sort of stood out to me.
And again, Ms.
Kelly.
Yeah, thanks.
Sorry, I was having some technical problems. So the Housing Authority, Charlottesville Redevelopment and Housing Authority, is not planning on making a LIHTC application this coming March. I don't know if they have any proposals for March 22 yet. That will depend on if they start planning sometime this year to start looking at an application. However, they have requested the 15 million or whatever that number is now over a certain amount of years. And that's what we continually look at as we still allocate funding so that we can cover overall redevelopment projections, but there are no specific proposed projects at this time to go forward. Crescent Halls and South First Street Phase 1 are proposed to start construction anytime, and South First Street Phase 2 will probably start construction about this time next year. And right now there aren't any proposed projects in the future planned, but they are looking at all their other sites. There's just nothing definite on board right now.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions at this time.
Reverend Heaton.
No, I don't have any more questions.
Okay. Ms. Dow. I think we lost Ms. Dow. Mr. Sulliates.
I'm prepared, thank you.
And Mr. Lidra.
Nothing more, thank you.
All right, let's begin our deliberations, and let's begin deliberations with thoughts towards a recommendation to council. And I'll go back to Bill again to begin.
I have no comments right now.
And Ms. Russell, you had some thoughts and I interrupted you when you were trying to present them. Forgive me, but let's get them out. Let's talk about them.
Well, would it make sense to sort of talk about, kind of have a discussion around some of these bigger ticket items like?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what I was starting to say about, or kind of thinking around in the West Main project was thinking about coming up with a way to fund a minimal amount. I don't know what that would be. that, doesn't completely kill the project. I'm not entirely clear what would be gained from, just walking away from it, but there's certainly others that are have much more historical knowledge than I do. Is that possible? Is it possible to find a solution and appreciating too that Chip Boyles does have a lot of experience in managing budgets and working with, VDOT smart scale funds?
I think Peter had an idea that I thought was somewhat appealing, but I think I drove that idea a bit. I think we definitely need to move forward with phase 1 and phase 3. Those are funded. But I think that if we could downsize the parking deck to the minimum, just to meet the needs of our commitment to the county, we could then move those funds into West Main, and then leverage the smart scale funding to at least do a little bit of what you're suggesting. Maybe we don't hit the home run, but we can get a double out of that. But again, that's what I'm thinking about this. But I interrupted other people. Did you have other thoughts before I asked Reverend Heaton for his thoughts?
No, let's keep going.
Okay, Reverend Heaton.
Yeah, so I like the conversation beginning with revenue. I mean, I think that's the smart place for us to coalesce around. And if we can agree on that much, that which is funded, that which is provided, then we can say, there's nothing to be gained by putting that off the table. So then what are we looking at?
What specifically do you mean by
the smart scale funding from state and just what you were saying of phases 2 and 3? But I think it's also not a lot to be gained by just completely wiping off improvements that need to be made that have residual benefit to the community long into the future. And that's why I mentioned the undergrounding, because I think undergrounding helps everything, pedestrians, bicycles, but it may not be part of the smart scale funding. But I think it'd be foolish not to, if you're spending that kind of money and you're doing that kind of renovation work, you underground it while you've torn up the street. So that's what if we're going to talk about, rather than talk about what we're going to take out, let's talk about what are the things that we should do while we're doing this project. Pick the ones that we think help the most and find a way to fund it through the city. I like your idea about downscaling the parking garage and using those funds so let's talk about what we think is most important that's not included in the smart scale funding.
And I think I skipped Rory.
Yeah.
How can I do that?
Yeah, I think this skipped me in the last question round too. I was hoping to get staff's input on this $10 million commitment that our consultants are talking about with the affordable housing plan. I mean, it seems like in the budget office's budget projections, there's a hard stop to any bond issuances after 2027, even with the tax increase, because we've maxed out our entire bondable capacity. And so with just what we're projecting here, any new programs for affordable housing or otherwise are going to be off the table. And it seems like we're about $5.5–6 million per year in this CIP. So, I mean, does staff think that $10 million a year is outlandish? What would be needed to make that happen?
So a couple of things there. I just want to caution you about talking about hard stops, especially when you talk about debt capacity, because as we talked with council last week in the work session, and as we displayed that debt table, there are a lot of moving parts there. So there are a lot of things that could be subject to change in terms of timing. I do think you're correct, though, that the big idea here is that with this current CIP plan, it does make further bonding capacity and future CIPs strapped. And so again, if you're talking about adding new dollars for affordable housing in a scenario in which we are putting forth a proposal that plans to basically spend all your capacity, you're correct. There isn't room to do that for a while. The other thing I would say is, and I don't want to preempt, I'm certainly not the expert here, and I don't want to preempt anything you're going to hear later tonight, but I think it's important when we talk about the $10 million number, it's not just what's in the CIP. So in other words, the $10 million for affordable housing, there are other programs and things that are being funded throughout various budgets in the city. There's a large portion in the general fund, as well as the CIP, which is the biggest contribution. And then the third point I would also make is there are a lot of affordable housing opportunities, such as the Friendship Court opportunity that is in the CIP that is not bond funded at all, and can't be for certain reasons. And so there's always the opportunity to fund future things with cash, should that opportunity arise as well.
Great, thanks. So yeah, I mean, moving on to kind of what I think about these things. You know, I think we have a problem in the city, and it's evident in some of these plans where we think about everything in a vacuum and we talk about these hard decisions and all these different things we want out of a project, and we just say, yes, please, I'll take it all. So I think that's what happened with the streetscape project, where that's why it went from, you know, a small or a $30 million project to a $50 million project. You know, we said we want to make the streets have wider sidewalks and be safer for bikes and pedestrians. But then we said, you know, we don't want to get rid of any parking. We want to, you know, have a nice new park. We want, you know, fancy pavers on the street. And like, I mean, I don't know if you guys have read the value engineering study that was presented to staff last week, but it is appalling. I mean, you've got $500,000 in there for rocks, literally just a boulder that's sliced into pieces for decorative purposes. You've got $500,000 for custom concrete benches that look incredibly uncomfortable, where you could have bought regular benches for like $20,000. And I think with the streetscape, you know, we really need to get back to what's important. And I think, I mean, phase 3, let's do the whole thing. Great. We're probably going to get state funding for everything, all our fancy bells and whistles, which is wonderful. We got lucky in Smart Scale this year, and the Culpeper District got a lot because there was more money in the pot than everyone expected. But, you know, for phase 1, I think you've got to like focus on what's important. We do want to close that slip lane. That's incredibly dangerous at Ridge and Main. You know, we could use some wider sidewalks. Once you close the slip lane, you have space. We're going to remove the statue. There's no need to so heavily program that park space, at least now, while we're budget strapped. You know, the funding isn't dependent on that sort of thing. On the whole project, the Silva cells and the undergrounding, like, they're luxuries. That none of these are necessities, really. And so I think it's important to address the safety of West Main, and I think we can do that for a much more limited cost without allocating any new funding for it, and possibly while reclaiming some existing funding. You know, yeah, I think, you know, we've assembled a sort of working group on some place members, some BPAC members, and some BAR members. We haven't really met or discussed yet because we're waiting on council to make a call, but I think if we make some tactical improvements in order to increase safety, we can fit that in with the rest of the stuff ongoing. There will need to be a capital investment to fix that intersection, and there's another smart scale project for Ridge Street improvements that just got approved that can slot into as well. And I really don't think the, you know, overall $50 million project for, you know, all those fancy bells and whistles and beautiful designs, I mean, it looks great, but, you know, there are trade-offs. And I think it's also important to recognize, like, the problem with the streetscape is we're spending all of our money on improving safety, sort of, I mean, kind of, mostly aesthetics, for one street. And it doesn't even get you a protected bike lane. And so by removing some of that money, I would hope to see that we have bike and ped infrastructure on other streets. Like across the city, we've got sidewalks that are completely missing, that drop out every half block. You know, in our FY20 plan, we had $2 million in the 5-year CIP for new sidewalks. We had $400,000 a year, and now we've dropped it down to $600,000 in the whole thing. We're not even going to fund it at all for 2 years. You know, I think that's hugely problematic. And on affordable housing, like, I think it's a similar deal, right? Like, you know, we have, you know, kind of designs, we engage the community, and there's no sense, you know, there's no explanation or trade-offs presented to people. You know, I think, you know, with the Friendship Court Vision Plan, you know, it's a great plan, and I think it's really important to, you know, have the community decide what they want. But I don't think the Friendship Court community would say, like, we want exactly this plan, even if it means wiping out all of the funding for affordable housing anywhere else in the city. So, you know, I think it's important to make sure that A, we're maximizing the available federal LIHTC funding and other funding that we can get for that sort of thing. But B, like, to make sure that we're, you know, planning this and designing it in a way that doesn't eat up the entire budget. You know, it's $288,000 a unit for Friendship Court Phase 1. And that seems high to me. So that's probably why they needed so much in external subsidies. You know, I think we have that problem across the whole city. I'd also say, I think we should defund the small area plan account. There are no plans planned, and there's a bunch of money sitting in it that could probably be pulled out. And I think the same is true for the economic development fund account, where there have been no recent expenditures, and there's literally $500,000 in cash just sitting in an account doing nothing. That's what I got.
Cool. Lots to chew on there. Reverend Heaton, I think before I talk to you, Lyle, have we talked to you yet?
No, I've just been sort of writing down people's ideas. I think that I don't think I've got any unique ideas. I'd like to see increases in funding for the Charlottesville Affordable Housing Fund, increased funding for tree planting, and providing more funding for essential parts of West Main to best use matching funds for health, safety, and cost and risk prevention. I might be writing a motion, but I don't have to make a motion if we're not ready for that.
We're not ready for that. And just keep in mind, if you're going to increase funding, you need to decrease funding.
I also have that.
Okay, well, tell us about it.
I would love to. I was thinking about delaying funding on small area plans until Seville plans is complete. Delaying funding on SIA improvements until Seville plans is complete. Delay funding on the garage, the courthouse, and East High by 1 year, and reduce funding on the garage. And
why wouldn't you not delay funding, let funding do what it does, but why wouldn't you downsize the parking garage project just to meet the basic needs and then move that money into other things?
I'm suggesting doing both. Delay and downsize.
And yeah, okay, but if we move the money out, you know, there was a memo on this someplace. I think it was in the memo that Missy sent. How does that affect the timeline we've agreed to with the county? And I guess that's a question for Ms. Amble to defer or direct to the proper person to answer.
Yeah, I will. Chris Engel can address that.
And Chris, you are muted.
Sorry, my apologies. Yeah, your question is regarding the timeline?
No. If we move the money out a year, does that impact any commitments we've got?
It likely would, yes. There's $2 million that was committed last year, and the estimated cost, bear in mind that the facility has not been designed. It has not been costed. There was a conceptual design done. It's really not a design, it's a concept drawing. But we won't have firm costs until such time as it's designed and a contractor is on board. But to maintain the schedule that the MOU lays out, which is November of 2023, there's really no time for the process to delay. We're not exactly sure when chunks of money would go out the door, but suffice it to say that the $2 million that was allocated last year would likely not be enough. If that helps.
All right, thank you. Forgive me how I interrupted you. Please, you were rolling out a list of really good ideas.
I'm just a listener. Sorry, Mr. Engel, delay funding on economic development. And that's what I see right currently, but I might be missing some things.
All right, start thinking about that motion. Mr. Landra. I skipped Ms. Dow. Ms. Dow, I'll be right back. But you were eating. Jody, go ahead.
Okay. Just a couple comments. One, I'm fine with deferring, delaying, or cutting from this year's allocation, the West Main Street. But I think Travis with Southern Environmental Law laid out some very good points regarding the money that's been allocated in the past, been given, granted, and how we go forward and looking at options. It seems to me that we're not going to solve that here, but I would certainly recommend that those issues be addressed by staff for the city council presentation so that council can make an informed decision. And the other comment I would make is just to be careful with, it seems to say that cells are a luxury in the West Main plan is to ignore the fact that Planning Commission has already cut back the setback next to nothing along West Main. And then we want to have a trees along West Main. The cells are there to allow the trees to be put in West Main. You can't have both. So that they're not a luxury. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Dow.
So I had actually had a question. Well, first, let me start by saying I also agree with you, Mr. Mitchell, that I think that at this point, because we do have a commitment with the county, that it would be essential not to break that commitment, but to reduce the funding for the parking garage to the bare minimum to meet that commitment. And then I hear we have to talk about revenue, income, and earnings. So I heard Mr. Fogel mentioned about a possibility of having appropriated tax, I guess, allocations based on, I'm pretty sure, the amount of their property. And so I would like to know, is that something that we could, as a city, could actually implement?
Well, I'll let Ms. Hamill jump in, but we actually are going to have, if we're going to do what this budget is asking us to do, we're going to have to increase the taxes over 5 years by up to, I think, 10%. So that's going to happen. What Jeff is suggesting is that we might want to even double that. So, but Ms. Hamill, I'll let you jump in.
I'm sorry, before I jump in, did you want to clarify, or can you clarify for me your question? It looks
Yes,
like
ma'am. So the thing is, I'm aware that we're going to have to raise the taxes, but as Mr. Fogel had mentioned in his public comment, not only just raising taxes, but to be able to raise the taxes where it is appropriated based on the amount that you're assessed. So therefore, somebody that can afford easily to pay more into their property taxes can do so, versus coming into a neighborhood where your house may be worth $350,000 and your neighbor's house is only worth $150,000, that y'all should not be taxed at the same rate. So my question to you, is that something that as a city that we can implement?
so. I'm out of my weight class here on responding to that. To be honest, I think that from my limited knowledge of real estate assessments is that There's not, the way that we do that is not a way to pick and choose, but the assessments have to be comparable to similar properties. So I don't think that's an option, but I certainly would defer to anyone else on staff who would have more to add to that than me.
I think Michael, you're muted, but if you want to jump in, please do. It looks like you've got some thoughts.
Yeah, I would just say to that, unfortunately, under state law and the Dillon rule, the state government explicitly lays out what taxes we can levy, and they're all regressive. We do not have the legal authority to base taxes based on income, value of land, or value of property, which I think is a huge problem, because I would agree that's really the fundamental solution, land value tax, other things. And I know that's something that Vice Mayor McGill and other councilors have been advocating to get that in our legislative packet to lobby the General Assembly to make those changes. But certainly, at least at this point, the General Assembly has not been favorable to that. And then last thing I would say as well is with the CHAP program, one of the difficulties there is, again, under state law, there are strict limits about the value of the property that can qualify. And so again, there's strict limits set by the state in terms of who can qualify and the amount of subsidy, I believe. So that's my understanding.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to jump in there. So the value of the property, that is what I've been told in the past is the most restrictive, but we still got quite a bit of ways that we could go within the law that we have now to ensure that lower income citizens receive the grant relief from the CHAP program. So over the past 3 years, when I got here, we were still giving out $525 and $375 as the grants. And now we're up to anyone $25,000 and under pay, annual income. They don't pay any real estate taxes. The 25,001 to 35,000, they receive $1,000 grant. 35,001 to 45,000 is $750, and 45,000 to 55,000 is $500. So we can expand all of those categories at this time. And last year we didn't make any changes to CHAP, and this year I've sent in 2 additional proposals, which would take this changes we didn't make last year. That's one proposal. And if we had made changes, very progressive changes last year and this year, then that is also a proposal that's included. So that's something that we'll have to discuss during the budget cycle. So we do need to get values up. I mean, I just sent council an email last week that even my property, my older home in Belmont, increased during the pandemic by almost $40,000, from $240,000 to $279,000. And so that was a significant increase. So a lot of families are experiencing that, and they're going to be priced out if we don't figure out how to, 1, advocate for the legislative changes, and then 2, work within the parameters that we can control and increase those subsidies today.
Thank you. And my thought process behind all of this is that clearly we cannot, Ms. Hamill started with saying we cannot fund every project. We know that. So at some point we're going to have to figure out how we're going to increase our revenues. And so we're always talking about, well, let's take this out or defund this or remove this, but we rarely have the conversation, or we're not having the conversation of, well, how are we ever going to get the projects done? How are we ever going to move forward? And I do have a hard time trying to debate in this forum tonight. Do I want to say that we need to finish West Main Street, which are streets, or do I want to invest this funding into our education system? Safety and education are both high priorities. So I was trying to look at it on the flip side of both of them need to be funded, and what can we do to try to increase revenues to be able to fund those? So at this point, I would just say, let's work on that. And then definitely one way to maybe ease that dollar amount is to reduce the funding of the parking garage to the bare minimum to meet our commitment. Thank you.
So I want to just briefly walk you guys through what I'm thinking about this. And then I'd like to ask council for a little input before we begin deliberating on a recommendation. The school system, got to do it. Don't think we got to touch it. Just leave the money there. The small area plans, that's $500,000 we can get back. Let's take that back and put it in the budget, put it elsewhere. The parking garage, I would downsize that just to do the absolute minimum and put that money back in the budget. With that money that we put back in the budget, I would send that to affordable housing, and I would send that money to begin phases 3 and phases 2 and 4. 1 and 2, 1 and 3 are funded. So phases 2 and 4 are not funded. I would move that money, that additional money, into West Main Street and do some bare minimum, and then go after the smart scale funding. I would recommend the council then go after the smart scale funding to get as much done as we can get done with the smart scale funding. But that's it. And the other thing, is I'm not certain I agree, we can talk about it more, with defunding economic development. Hopefully by the end of the year, everyone will have had a shot in the arm that wants a shot in the arm. And we will be at the point where we're gonna need to start getting our downtown mall and other parts of our city back up and running. And we're going to need Mr. Engel to have the infrastructure he needs to help us get back in the game. So let's think about that a little bit. But let me let council in to see if council's got any thoughts. Mayor. Any thoughts from council? Lloyd, you're unmuted. You must have something to say.
Yeah, one point that I wanted to make, and I will be happy to admit my own ignorance here, as it was exposed last week when I think, if I'm correctly understanding what Rory was saying, he may be making the same mistake I had been making, which was to assume that when the budget document that we received talks about a project balance, that there is actually cash sitting someplace. There isn't. And maybe Ms. Hamill can give the explanation that she gave to me. It's a series of paper transactions, essentially. It's sort of like the difference in Congress between something that's been authorized and something that's been appropriated. We have authorized it, we haven't appropriated it yet. There is no cash sitting in that $1.5 million, as I understand it, for the Economic Development Fund. Is that right, Ms. Hamill?
So the conversation that we had relates to bondable versus cash funded projects. If it's a cash funded project, which I believe the strategic initiatives account is,
yep.
There is actually cash for that. If it is a bond fundable project, because we don't actually sell bonds until the project is well underway or expected to be completed within 24 months, then there is no cash until we actually sell the bonds. So in this case, in the strategic investment account, there is money there for sure. But as we talk about some of these other things, like with the CRHA project, and then there was talk about the school reconfiguration, because they're bond funded projects, it really does not save in the long run in terms of phases and funding in phases, because we are selling the bonds at the time of the project. So, just like there was a question earlier about the 1.5 that was put in for CRHA, should that timing switch around because we've built in the 5-year total, if we needed to sell bonds earlier or later, we could. Does that help?
Actually, it clarifies something to a greater extent than you had last week when we spoke, so I appreciate it. And Rory, I apologize. I was insulting you. Turns out maybe you were righter than I was.
Anyone else from council have any input?
The only thing I've just heard the small area plans come up a lot, and not having a something on the block to kind of do that. I just know that last summer when it was being discussed if the Grady Preston intersection was going to be considered for smart scale, that we heard loud and clear from the community that they just felt like there wasn't any meaningful engagement on that process, and that would have to proceed getting to the smart scale funding. And so I know that one of the ways to do that was to propose having a small area planning process in advance of getting to that smart scale funding. And so maybe that's not the direction that you would recommend. I'm just mentioning because I feel as a individually, I heard that loud and clear, and I've brought this up with council, and I feel like that's a commitment that in some form or another we need to make to ensure that, because what was proposed in the smart scale funding was not a design that either the neighborhood got behind. There was not a lot of support for that. And we gave assurances that that doesn't mean that this is the direction it has to go. We're going to do a lot of meaningful engagement to get there. And I'm not sure if others want to weigh in, but I've always kind of saw that as maybe we taking a small area planning exercise to get to that point before the actual final designs and construction are there.
The only thought I've got about that is, do we want to really get too deep in that before we get the deliverable from the consultants that are helping us rewrite the comp plan?
And I totally hear that loud and clear. I just want to make sure that it's on everybody's radar that that's a very specific project that the neighborhood had tremendous feedback on last summer.
Understood. Anyone else from council have anything?
I have one quick question about the garage. What is considered to be the least amount necessary? Both in project, I guess. Because I don't know if that includes then replacing the businesses on the ground floor. I just want to, because I keep hearing everyone's talk about how, if move forward with the garage, but it being the absolute least necessary. And I just think that needs to have some definition, is what is considered to be the least necessary.
Mr. Cole.
It's a good question that I can't provide a good answer for at the moment. The $10 million estimate was derived based upon the concept, which the engineer and consultant helped us flesh out, which is roughly the by right envelope, roughly 3 stories with ground floor retail. So the bare minimum, I don't know exactly. People have different meanings for that. But that would have to be relooked at to figure out what a cost would be for what we might all agree is the bare minimum. So I can't give you a number as we sit here today, but $10 million is based upon the by right conceptual design of a roughly 300 space garage with roughly 10,000 square foot of commercial space in it.
I actually meant, I'm sorry, Chris, I actually wanted to know from the Planning Commission what they mean by bare minimum.
I don't think we know what bare minimum. What I do think we know is that we don't think we have to spend $8 million to give the county what is 90 or 190, I forget what the number is, but the number of parking spaces they need. And I do think that, and Ms. Russell, I think you wanted to say something. I'm going to let you do that in a minute. I do think that there are creative ways to meet our commitment without spending $9 million. Ms. Russell.
Yeah, I think well, what I understood, at least in the immediate, in terms of meeting our obligation and not understanding that we have a commitment to the county and that there's a timeline to do something. And the longer we don't do anything, the harder it is to build anything. But that there could be a way in which, especially in light of the current economic state of, businesses, that we could still meet our obligation to the county by providing the 90 spaces in the other garage, while then also figuring out a better use of the space in the long run, and just sort of looking at it again. Rory's talked about that. I think he has some good ideas. So that's what I meant by bare minimum, was actually just meeting our obligations with the lease of the other spaces, at least at first.
Hurry.
Yeah. So I didn't mention the garage earlier, believe it or not. So, I mean, my thoughts on that, you know, I've always from the start been an advocate of meeting the commitment we made to the county with a 90 space, you know, parking podium on that site. And I think the important thing is that we don't build this concept that we're going for now that is 3.5 times as much parking as we've promised to the county, which gets us to 3 stories of parking, which means any additional structure above, as we saw in our housing needs assessment bonus height analysis, has to be concrete and steel construction, which is very, very expensive. If you get it down to 1 or 2 stories of a parking podium, which could conceivably get like 200 spaces in it even, depending on how you configured it and whether you drop some spaces for to have a token retail space in the bottom. And I'd note that those are not replacing the existing businesses. It's too small. But you know, what I would envision would be a 1 or 2 story parking podium with a stick-built structure on top that could very conceivably be housing. You could fit on a 40,000 square foot footprint across 4 floors. You could easily fit 160 generously sized apartments on that site. And you can do it with federal funds and loans that end up not costing the county anything, or the city anything rather. You know, at this point, obviously I've been talking about this for a very long time, and the clock has been run out to the point that, you know, maybe I still think we could probably do that plan and still hit every deadline in that MOA. We'd have to pivot in the near term, obviously. Other options would include building the podium now, but with preparing to build a stick-built structure on top, which is going to cost less than the white paper, which envisioned a concrete and steel structure on top. And then, you know, the third option would be, and I've never advocated for this in the past, but going to the county and asking them if they're willing to kick the deadline a year, given that COVID happened and all of a sudden we have hundreds and hundreds of spaces available free in the Market Street Garage every single day. And we've always had hundreds of spaces available in the Water Street Garage. So my expectation is that they'd be perfectly fine with taking 100 spaces in the Market Street Garage like the agreement specifies in order to buy us a little bit of time so that we can end up giving them the 90 spaces we originally agreed to on that site. So, I mean, again, I think the most important thing is that you build 2 stories at most of parking so that a stick-built structure is possible. And I mean, ideally as little parking, you know, as we promised, 90 spaces. But you know, obviously there's going to be some parking demand, arguably, for any structure you put on top. You know, there'd have to be a zoning waiver or an expansion of the urban core parking zone to accommodate any use like that. But, you know, we talk about, you know, we've been talking about revenue, right? We've been talking about it in terms of raising taxes. But, you know, I think former Councilor Galvin raised a good point earlier. You know, when we talk about the West Main Streetscape and density, the revenue is supposed to come from the additional development that enabled, right? From adding a bunch of housing, which both solves our housing problem, which makes assessments stop rising as fast so that people's taxes don't go up as much just from assessments and not even the rate. And we get all that extra money as a city, right? And so we can do that by building housing on the garage site. You know, of course, for West Main, we downzoned the whole thing right around when we approved the streetscape. That didn't make a lot of sense. But, you know, there's an opportunity for us to have our cake and eat it too. But we have to accept, you know, building more productive uses on our land and not wasting this $5.4 million parcel with just a 3-story garage and nothing else.
Right.
Sorry if I may, just a couple, I mean, one on the parking garage. I think technically the least expensive option would be the county exercising their option to either revert back ownership of the existing surface lot or have, I think it's 100 spaces in the existing garage. So that's certainly technically the least expensive option. And I think one of the challenges, if we're talking about a more productive use of the site, which I think would be better than just a parking garage, it's not going to help us in the short term on the affordability question. It would still be a much better use, but not going to make an impact on the affordability. But I still maintain, I don't think there's any need for a structure there, and that we can meet the agreement building as few spaces as possible. And I certainly understand all the details, but when you step back, there's certainly a deep and wonderful absurdity about coming up with a $10 million plan to provide 90 spaces when there's a lot that already has 67. But that is what it is. But the bigger point is I would just caution, as I did at the work session, about the importance of us, I think, just honestly confronting the budget picture. Again, even if we were to cut West Main, cut the parking garage, raise the real estate tax by 10 cents over 5 years, one, if school reconfiguration is closer to 100 million rather than 50, we're still not there at all. And two, again, even if we're cutting these projects, raising taxes by 10%, that means that the debt service fund is completely depleted, that there's no room for new CIP projects, and there's no room in our general fund. And that's going to be a huge challenge because we have so many deferred investments in our departments. You know, we're talking about these CIP priorities. If we haven't invested in departments to give them the resources and staff they need to execute these plans, we haven't really done a whole lot. And I think that's the situation we're in. And so I think it's just a much more difficult budget reality than I think council or the community has really fully dived into yet in terms of thinking through what really are the trade-offs. Because again, even if we're cutting West Main, assuming school reconfiguration is at 50 million, cutting the parking garage, and again, 10 cents of real estate tax, that means no new affordable housing CIP investments, no new significant general fund expenditures or investments in departments and staff positions. So I think it's just this is a much more difficult conversation than I think we've yet gotten to as counselors of community. So just want to caution about that.
And just if I can just follow up with what Councilor Payne just said, you know, part of what we haven't done well that we need to do is that the money that we are spending, we don't know how efficiently that money is being spent. A year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago, part of the feedback was that there was one of the money that the housing fund had funded for over a decade that I think it was between 10 or $12 million that they have received in that time frame. And we can't point to what we have to show for that 10 to $12 million investment. I don't have my notes in front of me, but I know it was in that range. So part of what we have to get a better handle on is where the money is going, and are the individuals that we're giving the money to, are they doing what they say they're doing? As I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about my headline in the newspaper. But anyway, we need to make sure that we fully understand where the money is being spent. And we don't know that. I remember Jeff Levine, the last time he was before us, he said that the 600 West Main Street, the apartments in there that were supposed to be affordable were empty. To rent them. So as we are approving SUPs, they are empty apartments that apparently they can say they're going to build and then not fill. But how do we know it's empty? Like, who's checking on that? Other than him saying it, how do we know that? And in terms of building our way out of this, if you look just back historically, there have been a lot of units built. I think about even looking in the 6th Street neighborhood, there are people buying those old homes, knocking them down, and then there are newer homes in those spaces. There are barbershops where people used to live, and people native, you know, to the community, like native Black people. A Black-owned business that we funded through the CIC is now an architect firm. I think it's Red Clay. And all this is happening on 6th Street. And then there's a new development that's coming up there. And based on what a friend told me who was asked to sell their property, and it's Holly's property, that they just want to build, new apartment units, and they won't be affordable for affordable housing. So I don't think we're at a space where we can talk about building, our way out of this. I don't think we ever had the conversation around the schools where we thought we would be able to do rehab or reconfiguration or build new buildings without increase in revenue from somewhere. And so until we get that information, we won't know what that is and whether we can reduce it to what, because until the experts come back and tell us what the possibilities are, we won't know that. But we have a lot of money going to a lot of different spaces and we don't have a good handle on it. And because it's normal, because those are the organizations we've been giving money to, we're sitting here having these conversations. I think West Main and that stretch and what has been presented over and over again, what's been proposed versus what is the bare minimum for that mile. I mean, it's something that we have to think, really, hard about, especially when when we're going to get this plan back that we need to invest $10 million a year in housing to even stabilize the community. And we're not quite sure what that even means or whether we can make those commitments. So there's a lot of things that are going to enter these discussions that, if we max out or if we go in these discussions thinking that we can do it without raising taxes, and if we are not a little bit more creative about how, to make sure the money that we're currently using is more efficient and to track those housing developments to make sure that they're actually even affordable by any standard, but hopefully by a standard we can agree upon that we are going to base things on here. We are not going to, we're not going to be able to fix any of this.
Right. So why I think we're ready to begin thinking about crafting a recommendation. And Lyle has been keeping track of some of these ideas. So I'm wondering if you can just kind of toss them out there and we can deliberate them and then begin crafting a recommendation. What I'd like to do is not give council a negative recommendation, but just recommend amendments to the budget as it has been presented by staff. If that is the pleasure of the body.
You've read my mind.
Okay, I don't see anybody else's head nodding now. Oh, they're nodding now. Okay, all right, you're good. Go for it.
So the language I have right now, and happy to have a discussion. In fact, I propose. I move to recommend approval with the following changes. There are several. First, delay funding on small area plans until Seville plans is complete and reassign the existing pot. Delay funding on SIA improvements until Seville plans is complete. Delay funding on the garage, courthouse, and East High by 1 year and reduce funding on the garage.
Let's stop for just 1 minute on the garage.
It's vague. It's vague.
It is vague, but you still are suggesting a delay in funding. And I think that's what gives Chris a little bit of heartburn. Because that means we would be in the position of not meeting our commitment.
So
unless you're thinking that we
would have to find another
garage. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. Who am I talking to? Oh, Gary, Alex and Gary. Alex is trying to get in first. Let's get Alex and then let's get you, Gary.
Yeah, Lyle, did I hear you say, I understand not funding the small area plan, but are you also recommending shifting the existing money in the account?
That is in the current motion. Does that make sense to you?
You said the word you used was delay, not
well, delaying funding it makes a lot of sense to me, but shifting the existing fund in the account, that's what I have trouble with.
Can you explain why?
Moving the existing, are you recommending moving the existing fund in the small area plan to something else?
currently. Is that a bad idea?
Yeah, I think it's a bad idea because we have some minor commitments, that we need to fulfill. Not funding it this year is understandable, but trying to shift the funding, existing balance, that might be a problem.
Would the word some be helpful? Shift some.
Yeah, I think we need some room so we can negotiate that with the budget office.
Great.
The word uncommitted.
All right, I have a little heartburn on the garage, but let's keep going. Let's get the motion out there. We can get
I've got some heartburn on the courthouse. I think that is actually underway, and that is the important part of the commitment to the county. So I don't think we should mess with those funds.
Is that true?
I believe that is accurate.
I think using the word some will allow us the wiggle room we need.
Some is a great word. I could change some on that. Delay some funding on garage, courthouse, and East High by 1 year. Reduce funding on garage. Fair?
Yep.
And it's okay that we're not being specific?
I don't think we should mess with the courthouse at all. I'm not sure that it really helps us to move funding for bondable projects, given that we already have a large authorized but not issued account. Is that right, Ms. Hummel? That there isn't really any effect to that?
So when you say move, are you talking about moving it to a different account?
To a different year, I think.
Yeah, you're correct. It's still baked into the 5-year plan. So any of the projections and affordabilities we talked about, it doesn't change the picture that much.
I'm removing the word courthouse. Delay funding on economic development. Don't touch the existing pot.
Oh, you don't agree with the point that I was making earlier.
Delay.
Okay.
There's already $1.5 million in the pot, so.
That's a part I'm confused about as well. What is the actual impact if the 150,000 is not funded?
Well, since we haven't spent anything in a decade,
yeah.
It'd be minimal.
I'd be happy to chime in there, Mr. Chair, if you'd like. Typically, staff would recommend putting some in every year, and thus the 150,000. In past years, it's typically more than that. It's not the end of the world if 150,000 doesn't go into it this year. There is a pot available for any unique needs that might come up over the next year, of which there could be some given the economic situation and the assistance that might be needed there. So, but it's not the end of the world if 150 doesn't go in this particular year, although it does kind of lead to a precedent where you might continue to leave it out and then you don't have available funds for things that in the past have been beneficial to the city, such as starting Hillsdale, first phase of Hillsdale Drive a number of years ago, or underground utilities, things of that nature. So.
All right, Lyle, the key word is it's not the end of the world, so keep on.
I love that word. Increase funding for the Charlottesville Affordable Housing Fund. Increase funding for tree planting. Provide more funding for essential parts of West Main to best use matching funds for health, safety, and cost and risk prevention, prioritizing 2 and 4.
Cool.
1 and 3?
1 and 3 are paid for.
3 is paid for, well, yeah, but 4 is way off in the future, right? It's not even in the near term plan, is my understanding.
Would it be more helpful to just say 2 then?
I mean, personally, I would say hold off on 2 for now. It's not a particularly important stretch, and better allocate the funds already committed for 1 to remove unnecessary features and focus on essential safety improvements that enable that revenue sharing, and maybe for two, to downscope if possible while maintaining that smart scale award.
And I would not agree. I would not mess with 1. I would not mess with 3, and I would move as much money as I frankly agree with the verbiage that you outlined, Lau. It was pretty much a home run for me.
Could we do like a straw poll?
It gives council a lot of flexibility and buys us a little time as well.
Could we do a straw poll? I have no feelings about this.
I think maybe we should, for the more controversial things, have individual amendments to the motion and vote on those.
Chair, does that make sense to you?
That works for you?
Sure.
Okay, then for this, I would suggest taking that last part off and just keep it to provide more funding for essential parts of West Main to best use matching funds for health, safety, and cost and risk prevention.
That's good. Wow. Rory, what do you think?
I would suggest maintaining already allocated funds for West Main in order to address safety improvements and maximize matching funds while minimizing unnecessary aesthetic features.
And I can live with that as well. But what does the rest of the board think? Does Ms. Dow, Ms. Russell?
I'm concerned about who decides what are unnecessary aesthetic features.
Council will, right?
Right, and so
if we're going along in the thinking of keeping the positive in, then I like having health, safety, cost, and risk prevention, and kind of leaving it open-ended.
And I just have a pet peeve about undergrounding. I believe that health, safety, and that is not merely a aesthetic. It completely transforms the streetscape. So
yeah, it also costs.
I know, but it opens up so many possibilities that you can't even imagine. But anyway, that's my pet peeve.
That is the motion.
All right, why don't you walk us through the motion once again and go line item by line item. What I'd like to do is either get consensus. If I don't have consensus, then we'll vote on it by line item as a recommendation.
Okay. First section, I don't think we need a vote. Recommend approval with the following changes.
That works.
Delay funding on small area plans until CVIL plans is complete and reassign some funds.
Is everyone comfortable with that?
I would say uncommitted funds.
What can you remind me what the reassign some funds means? Is that by year or by, is that laterally or vertically?
There's just there's a chunk of money sitting there, real money. Actually, no, that's bondable.
Bondable.
God, that might be nothing. Funny.
Well, so it does matter to remove bondable funds if you're actually removing it forever, right? It just doesn't matter if you move it from one year to the next, in that our authorized but not issued amount will go down, which leaves room for more bonds for something else, right?
Yes, I keep it.
Good job.
Been watching these work sessions.
How do we feel about that line?
I think we've got nods across the board. So
good line. Good. Let's do another line.
So Ms. Creasy, that one's hit.
Delay funding on SIA improvements until CVIL plans is complete.
I see no objections.
Beautiful. Delay some funding on the garage and East High by 1 year. Reduce funding on garage.
Sorry, Lau, can you go back to the second one?
Yes.
Thank you.
Delay funding on SIA improvements until CVIL plans is complete.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Delay some funding on garage and East High by 1 year. Reduce funding on garage.
I'd like to make that proposal more specific and recommend council take immediate action to refocus the garage plan in order to fulfill the commitment to the county while pursuing a more productive use for that site I'm pulling it straight from last year's motion out of my head. But, you know, as we said, in order to meet the deadlines, we're going to need to move in the near term. And if we want to work with the county in order to flex those deadlines or potentially provide spaces in the Market Street Garage in the meantime, you know, we need people who are above our heads to act on that, to coordinate with them if they'd like to. And you know, if it means, you know, a plan that builds a parking podium and a stick-built structure using federal loans, that might mean funding from the CIP in the near term that then gets refilled on the backside, you know, when it's sold off as housing, right? Or when the affordable housing funds from the feds come in.
I'm trying to think of a way to express that in terms of funding.
Creasy, what was the text message you just sent us that might be helpful?
Sorry, I was just trying to summarize what was being said. The first part was Lyle's information, and then Rory added on for Phil County a commitment and allow time to look for additional options.
You look more perplexed than I usually do, Lyle. What's going on?
I'm just trying to put that in terms of budget recommendations. Oh, okay. Missy wrote something down. Thank you in the chat here. The thing you said. Fulfill county commitment and allow time. Sure. Does that seem reasonable?
Yes.
I happily add that to the motion.
Rory, you good with that?
Yeah, I think that works. I mean, I might just say adjust funding commitment to properly address a rescoped project that council provides direction on in the near term or something.
My listening comprehension may be failing me.
While we keep moving, Rory, write it down and put it in the text. Rory, text it to us. Write it down and put it in the, yeah.
How do we feel about what I've said?
I'm good with it. Rory wants to make it more more temporal. He wants to put some timing in it. So Rory's typing it up now and he'll get it to us.
Get back to that.
And that was the whole of your motion, wasn't it?
No.
Okay,
that was another line. I guess we can come back to this line and I'll do the next line.
Yeah, we'll come back to this. Well, we'll get what Rory's typing and we'll come back to it.
Great. Delay funding on economic development.
And Mr. Ingalls says it's not the end of the world, so I'll zip it. Everybody good with that? Yep. Cool.
Great. Increase funding for Charlottesville Affordable Housing Fund. This includes rehab. It includes
that's
light tech,
God,
all the things.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Increase funding for tree planting.
For tree planting? Was that even
tree planting?
Or the ash borer?
This is tree planting.
Was that a request from the tree commission?
Yes.
It's a little bit outside the scope of funding, but I'd like to add something about increasing the visibility on that donation program for trees. I can't even find anything about it on the city website, and any external or philanthropic funding.
So you can just add that onto your amendment. Increase funding for tree planting and
pursue external donations.
Love it. You like that?
Yep.
The last line, provide more funding for essential parts of West Main to best use matching funds for health, safety, and cost and risk prevention.
I see no negative hits. Is everybody good with that? Okay, yeah, you like that? Yeah, it's good.
Wonderful. How are we feeling about Garage and East High?
So East High, isn't that signalization project lining up with a smart scale? So timing matters for that one. Also, it's bondable, so timing doesn't matter from that perspective. Is that right?
It's time to sync with the garage whenever the garage happens.
Yeah, but I think it's also syncing with the smart scale, with the signalization.
It is a smart scale project.
So it cannot be delayed, or it can?
I'm not sure about that. I don't know if there are any project managers on that could address that. I'm not sure.
Are we talking about East High?
That's right.
Okay, so East High is scheduled for construction, I believe, in fiscal year 24. So that is when the funds would absolutely positively need to be in the budget.
Beautiful. Thank you. And okay, I've got some new language from Rory. Adjust garage funding to an appropriate level to pursue a rescoped, more productive garage project that fulfills the commitment to the county and maximizes the value of the site. A little bit of repetition with what I said. Let me see if I can chop that
But
up.
yeah, I have no problem with that either. And Ms. Russell has a point she'd like to get in as well.
Lyle, you mentioned, and I agree, increasing the affordable housing fund. And I just wanted to maybe make the point to sort of that it diversify its portfolio in terms of what it funds.
I'd be comfortable adding that. Recommend diversifying portfolio. Sure. Let me do those last two again that have changed. Delay some funding on garage and East High by 1 year. Reduce funding on garage. Fulfill county commitment and allow time to look at additional options. Adjust garage funding to an appropriate level to pursue a rescoped, more productive garage project that fulfills the commitment to the county and maximizes the value of the site. You like that?
I'm good with that, Rory. You good with that? Rory's good. Liz, you good?
Okay.
Tania, wait. Tania, she's not nodding. Okay. And Jody already weighed in, and
I know what Rory means by maximizing the value and productive garage, but I still I'm pleased to think that it's still vague enough that the others might be able to still work with it.
so does that mean you're good with it?
That means I'm good with it, yes.
And last but not least, Reverend Heaton. He's good with it. All right. I hate to make you do this, but just so we can have a formal vote, would you read the motion one more time, and I'll ask for a second, and then we'll vote on it.
I would have insisted.
I'd like to add one more thing at the end there, which is to restore new sidewalks to historical funding levels in out years in order to meet our long-term commitment to sidewalk infrastructure.
Could we do increased funding for new sidewalks?
Sure.
Yeah, it's simpler. Yep.
I think there's technically no funding this year, but
Correct.
no, whatever.
All right.
I'm comfortable with that.
All right, go ahead and read us your motion so we can get a second and an up or down vote.
Recommend approval with the following changes. First, delay funding on small area plans until Seville plans is complete and reassign some funds. Delay funding on SIA improvements until Seville plans is complete. Delay some funding on the garage and East High by 1 year. Reduce funding on garage. Fulfill county commitment and allow time to look at additional options. Adjust garage funding to an appropriate level to pursue a rescoped, more productive garage project that fulfills the commitment to the county and maximizes the value of the site. Take a breath. Delay funding on economic development. Increase funding for Charlottesville Affordable Housing Fund. Recommend diversifying portfolio. Increase funding for tree planting and pursue external donations. provide more funding for essential parts of West Main to best use matching funds for health, safety, and cost and risk prevention, increase funding for new sidewalks.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second? Would anyone like to second the motion?
I'd second the motion.
We have a motion and have a proper second. All in, Ms. Creasy, you better poll the board.
Sure, I was just gonna put this in the chat, the entire motion, in case anyone wanted to look at that from that perspective. All right. All right, Mr. Lahindro.
Aye.
Mr. Stoli Yates.
Aye.
Ms. Dow.
Aye.
Mr. Heaton.
Aye.
Mr. Stolensberg.
Aye.
Ms. Russell.
Aye.
And Mr. Mitchell.
Hey. Right, Hal, thank you. Very good, helping us to moderating us through that and leading us through that. Would we like to take a 5-minute break before I think Seville Plans Together is next, right? Would we like to take a 5-minute break?
Just to clarify, I asked Ms. Tracy, this next agenda item is the same presentation as me presented to council next week. So I'm just letting you all know I'm going to depart. So thank you all for your work and time.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Price, start the clock, 5 minutes. Mr. Rice, start the clock. 5 minutes.
It's coming, Chair.
Okay.
It takes a little doing to get it started.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry to be so impatient. Oh, you were, that was very good. Thank you very much for leading us through that. Thank you. That went well. Thank you.
Delighted. It was, I'm proud of it.
So Jenny, I think I get to turn the meeting over to you and just get to sit back and listen. Is that about right?
For a little bit, yes.
For a little bit.
And then we'll be asking for some of your feedback again.
Ah,
but
okay, but you're leading the meeting, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so I can kick back. Where's my beer?
Should we go ahead and get started? I'll wait, I guess.
Let's wait another. We need Gary and Tania and is Tania. Gary is Jody's here. So let's give Gary a minute.
Hi guys, I know you're probably wondering why I keep looking back and forth, but I am also not only attending this meeting, I'm on my other computer in a live Zoom for the school reintroduction, and I have some really major questions and issues, so I am definitely paying attention, but I have to be logged into this. But we will be taking attention.
All right, we're going to give Gary another 30 seconds, and then we're going to go ahead and begin. Okay. Why don't we go ahead and begin, Jenny?
Okay, great, thanks. So thanks for having us tonight. I'm Jenny Koch from RHI, part of the Seville Plans Together team. Also with me tonight is Sarah Kirk from HRNA. HRNA has led the development of the Affordable Housing Plan. So she'll be talking you through some of the revisions tonight. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to note, we've spoken with you several times about the recommendations in the Affordable Housing Plan. So tonight our intent is not to go through the entire plan, but we want to talk through some of the main revisions that the team, mostly HRNA, has made since December based on public comment, council, planning commission, and staff feedback. So on the agenda, there was also a link to the public engagement summary from November and December from that comment period that really fed into some of the changes we'll be discussing. On the agenda, there was also, that's in the packet, there was also a list of these revisions we'll be walking through with page numbers. And our presentation tonight is largely pulled directly from the Affordable Housing Plan. We've also posted that presentation we'll be sharing tonight is on our Stay Involved page on the Seville, on SevillePlansTogether.com. So if you want, you can pull it up there. So as Missy mentioned, we're speaking with council next week at the 4 p.m. Report session for the meeting. And we'll be sharing the same presentation with them at that point. So our goal tonight is to hear from you if there are specific items you would like us to share with council as they consider this plan, things you want them to think about as we look to move forward with this. So with that, I will pass it off to Sarah Kirk to go through some revisions. And then after she's done, I'll briefly talk about next steps, and then we'd like to get into any of your questions or discussion.
Great, thanks so much, Jenny. And as Jenny said, we're really going to focus on key changes between the final draft that we have released now and that's in the packet and the public draft that was released in November. We can go to the next slide. So again, we had the draft plan that was available for public input. We conducted a lot of engagement around that. The public comment period was from November 3rd through December 2nd. Following that, we spent a lot of time making revisions. We got a lot of great input and feedback about the plan, and have been working closely with the city to make sure that not only are we addressing all of those major comments that were received, but that the plan is, continues to be in line with where the city needs it to be. So this final plan has been revised. We're presenting the changes here. We'll be presenting to council next week. And the hope is that it will then advance to a council vote for endorsement. So we can go to the next slide. Great. And next slide again. Okay. Many of the changes, obviously, there were a lot of sort of small, typo type errors, formatting fixes, things like that. We're not going to talk about that. What we want to talk about is where there were some substantive changes in the plan between the public draft and the final draft. So the larger changes included clarifying and strengthening the draft to really better align the contents of the plan with its intended outcomes. There were some places where the intent of the language that was being used or the intent of the recommendations weren't really clear. And so what we've really done is we've clarified language to make sure that we're both being explicit about what the recommendation is and how it will be implemented by the city. We've added expanded homeownership tools. One of the things that we heard pretty clearly was that we needed to be really thinking more broadly about opportunities for homeownership. In addition, we've added some additional detail about how the plan can serve vulnerable populations as well as address energy costs as part of housing affordability. And then the sort of major addition here, nothing new in terms of content, but we've added an implementation summary to the executive summary that really just provides a 3-page snapshot of the implementation steps that would be needed over time for each of the recommendations and the likely impacts of that. We can go to the next slide. In terms of the clarified language, there were a few key areas where it became very clear that we needed to be a little bit more explicit and a little bit more clear about what the plan was recommending and why. That includes making a clearer distinction about the link between racial equity and homeownership and being a lot clearer about the specific ways in which the plan would help Charlottesville to advance racial equity. In addition, we got a little bit more specific and a little bit more clear about opportunities for regional collaboration. Previously, if you remember, both of those pieces kind of lived within each individual recommendation. That's still the case, but what we've done is we've put new content in the introduction that speaks kind of at the holistic level about across the whole plan, how are we really thinking about racial equity and opportunities for regional collaboration. So nothing really changing in terms of the actual recommendations, but what we've done is gathered all of that and put it in one place so it can be seen a lot more clearly. We've also heard that we needed to be a little bit clearer about what exactly was included in the funding commitment from the city. So we've worked really closely with the city to make sure that we're messaging that as clearly as possible and have made some revisions to the way that we're talking about that in order to be very clear about what's included and where. And then a small clarification about what we mean when we talk about cities that receive developments that receive city assistance. We can go to the next page. So I don't expect anybody to read this. Throughout this plan, what we've done is we've put the pages from the plan here and kind of talked about what's new or what's different. I'm not going to try to present all of the content of this, but what you'll see in the upper right-hand corner, we've added this new page to the introduction after we've introduced the guiding principle of racial equity that really highlights the critical strategies to advance racial equity. So as I said, we've gathered up all of those bits of information that were in all of the recommendations separately and put them in one place. And really the key areas that we're focusing on advancing racial equity are around home ownership. And we talk about some of the expanded tools there, around governance. And we talk about the importance of having governance structures that are inclusive of community voices and reflect the diversity of Charlottesville. And around metrics. So that's another one we're talking about a little bit more explicitly here. We talk about it in the funding section, but really key to the successful implementation of the plan will be ensuring that affordable housing programs are accessible and able to be used by all residents, including BIPOC residents and including a broad diversity of Charlottesville residents. So we've talked about that a little bit more clearly here. Next page. So similarly for regional collaboration, we've added this new page that again highlights those opportunities for regional collaboration. And in this case, though we do talk about regional collaboration with the broader metropolitan region, we focused most explicitly here on opportunities to collaborate with Albemarle County to replicate some of the recommendations within the urban ring, as well as opportunities for collaboration with the university, because that was one thing that we heard, was not addressed as explicitly as it could be. So we wanted to really clarify where we see those opportunities here. We can go to the next page. In terms of funding, I think this page, there are a couple of new pages that we'll talk through, but this page most clearly explains when we say $10 million, what are we talking about? So really it's $7 million of direct subsidy. That's most of it would be going either through the CAF or other allocations. $2 million of that is tax relief that the city has already allocated. And the city does need to be spending funds on administration of these various housing programs. And so we wanted to capture that here. Next slide. Another thing that we really wanted to do when we clarified how we talked about the funding commitment of the city is to be really explicit about the fact that the city has already made really substantial commitments to funding for housing projects. And so we've outlined those here. And really this gets the city pretty close to meeting that $10 million commitment over the next 5 years. So that's something that we wanted to be very clear about. This is not additive. We want to recognize the fact that the city has already committed funds to these very significant projects. That's part of what we're recommending, and what we're talking about is sustaining that level of funding beyond those particular projects. Next page. Again, we've really just tried to provide a lot more context in the funding section just to talk about the scale of commitment and what's included in it. So one way that we've done that is to add this comparison of the direct subsidy funding. So that's $7 million a year or $70 million over 10 years that we're looking for Charlottesville to commit to. And the fund that represents about $140 per capita per year. And really, when you look at other cities that have recently made big investments in direct subsidy for affordable housing, that's a pretty high number. Washington, D.C. is higher, but Washington, D.C. obviously a very different kind of city. When we looked at places like Richmond and Raleigh that have made, really big commitments to affordable housing recently, when you look at it per capita, it's really only about $35 per capita. So Charlottesville, like that $70 million in direct subsidy funding is a really significant amount of funding. And we wanted to be very clear that was a big commitment from the city. Next page. I think this is the final additional slide. This is actually a revision of what was in the draft previously. And what we're trying to do here is make it a little bit more clear. There are a lot of different funding sources that the city could tap to support and sustain that commitment to funding over time. And the city will really need to start early to identify which of those are the most feasible in terms of the potential to generate revenue, whether it's legal in Virginia, obviously, and also, thinking about the equity impacts of particular funding. Some taxes are regressive, others are progressive, and we want to make sure that we're not, taxing low-income residents in order to pay for affordable housing. So that's really the key focus of the sort of clarified slide about the potential for new funding sources in Charlottesville. Next page. Great. A smaller change for developments receiving city assistance. We've just clarified city assistance. We are qualifying as projects that either receive funding directly as subsidy or indirectly through infrastructure improvements. So that's what we mean when we talk about housing developments that receive city assistance or city funding. Next page. Great. So the second section of major edits to the draft was in expanding homeownership tools. So we did make some changes to the existing tools, but we've also added several new homeownership tools to the final draft. Those include employer-assisted down payment assistance. So we talked about that in great detail. So we had previously recommended down payment assistance funded through the city, but now we're talking about opportunities for the city to work with major employers, including the university, to encourage them to develop their own down payment assistance programs. We talk about Section 8 voucher to homeownership programs, so helping people who receive Section 8 vouchers to get into a rent to own situation to build assets. And we've talked about some flexible mortgage tools. So particularly using a local mortgage pool with individual development accounts to help people access more flexible funding for homeownership. Next page. So those 3 recommendations are here in the summary page. I will go through them each, but I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them. I would encourage you to take a look, and we can spend more time on it later if there are questions, but those 3 are captured here. We've also kind of reorganized each of the subsidy tools to be a little bit clearer about the different categories. So this is the larger homeownership subsidy piece. So again, we're encouraging the city to encourage and work with major regional employers to develop down payment assistance programs as a benefit for employees, working with CRHA to create the option of access to homeownership for voucher users, and partnering with lenders and nonprofits, including potentially CDFIs, to help homeowners succeed at homeownership through the local mortgage pool and individual development accounts. So we can go to the next page. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. It basically, much like all of the other recommendations, we've provided a case study. We talk about the context for the tool and its potential impacts. Next page. As well as the implementation needs. Next page. Another new page here for the Section 8 tool. We talk about the context and recommended changes. The key here, obviously, is that CRHA is in charge of the Section 8 vouchers. So this is really about the city encouraging CRHA to create this program, supporting that, and potentially identifying ways to kind of link that with other homeownership programs. Next page. Again, with the action steps and the implementation, this is led by the CRHA, but there's a role that the city can play in supporting the success of the program. Next page. With the local mortgage pool, we talk in a little bit more detail. We spent some time defining the terms that we're using here and outline some recommended changes about how these new mortgage tools could be structured to help to reduce barriers to home ownership. Next page. And again, we provide a case study from the Self-Help Credit Union that kind of outlines how these programs can have impacts, as well as the implementation needs and how this would align with guiding principles. Next page. This model really just kind of helps to further illustrate how this model can help to reduce barriers to home ownership and the way in which partners such as lenders can work with the city and nonprofits to coordinate access to this program. Next page. Great. A smaller area of changes, but I think a really crucial one. We've added some additional detail about vulnerable populations, including seniors and adults with disabilities, and how they can be served through some of the recommended programs. And we've also talked a little bit more clearly about the link between housing costs and energy costs, as well as, again, making a clearer link between the programs in the plan and ways to support energy efficiency. We've also been a little bit clearer there, obviously, and this is something we've talked about, I think, with the Planning Commission in the past, as well as with the Steering Committee. There are a lot of topics that are adjacent to and directly related to housing affordability that really fall outside the scope of an affordable housing plan. Those would include things like income. So we talk about that and acknowledge the limitations of the affordable housing plan in addressing all of those things that relate to housing affordability. Next page. Great. So here, again, where we're summarizing the key housing challenges, we've added this paragraph at the bottom that really acknowledges transportation costs, income, energy costs, environmental quality, and a lot of other factors are closely tied to housing affordability. But the Affordable Housing Plan does not make recommendations to address these challenges directly. We do talk a little bit about energy costs, but it's not a key focus of the plan. These items will be addressed further in the comprehensive plan as well as in the climate action plan. So we just wanted to acknowledge that there are limitations to what an affordable housing plan can do. Next page. Great. So one of the places where we've called out the opportunity for energy efficiency and energy savings a little bit more explicitly is in the acquisition fund. The city has the potential to use the acquisition fund to make investments in building energy retrofits, such as weatherization, appliance efficiency, other things that can not only preserve the long-term affordability of the housing, but make sure that you're passing on energy cost savings to residents. Next page. Owner-occupied rehabilitation assistance is another place where we've made a clearer link both to the potential for owner-occupied rehab assistance to help reduce energy costs by making weatherization improvements and retrofits, as well as the fact that owner-occupied rehab is a really important tool to address the needs of elderly residents who want to remain in their homes, but may need to make adjustments or accommodations in order to do so safely, as well as for people living with disabilities who may require special accommodations or modifications to their homes. Next page. And again, here in the how this relates to a comprehensive approach, we've made that same link. Next page. Great. The final major change that we wanted to highlight was the addition of this 3-page implementation summary. So we've got a snapshot of the implementation steps and timing for recommended actions, as well as a summary of the anticipated impacts. Next page. So this is a new page. It really talks about the potential timeline for implementation, and then for the governance and funding recommendations, talks about key steps that would need to be taken within 6 months, within 18 months, and within 3 to 5 years. So this is really talking about sort of how to move immediately, the sort of longer term implementation needs over the next couple of years, and then longer term opportunities to continue to build on those initial recommendations and those initial changes. Next page. Again, this is kind of a continuation of the same concept. We've expanded it for each of the tools chapters, and talking about how, you know, the really the key 6-month changes are, you know, the land use. A lot of the land use changes are going to begin to be accomplished over the next 6 months through the CVIL plans together process, and will be finished within that 18-month time frame. And we've identified, again, most of those changes would be made within that 18-month horizon, and we've identified some opportunities for longer term changes over time. Next page. This snapshot of impact is in the executive summary. It is a duplicate of a page that was in the funding section. And that was a slightly modified page, but very similar to what was in the public draft. But we've repeated it here in the executive summary because we thought it provided a really good snapshot of the impact of the recommended changes. So not really new content here, but it's new to the executive summary. Next page. So that's really what we have in terms of a summary of those larger substantive changes to the draft. There were other changes and tweaks made throughout, but in terms of the key places where things have changed around the language and around how we're explaining certain concepts and things that have been added, those are the key ones. So if we can open it up to comment, Jenny, I don't know if you wanted to say anything else about kind of what we're looking for. Oh, Jenny, I think you're
Jenny, we can't hear you. You're not muted, but we can't hear you. So while Jenny's attempting to figure out what's going on, got a question for you. There is a bullet midway through that a bit of a sleeper until now for me, and you spoke to rent control. What sort of, we can't do that without going to the state, I would guess. Is that accurate? We've got Dillon rule says we can't implement rent control for that. Are there other cities in Virginia that have implemented rent control? Because I always think of big cities when I hear rent control. I think of Washington, think of New York, San Francisco.
Yeah, to my knowledge, there aren't other places in Virginia, although we didn't look at that in detail. The recommendation is really about working with other places in Virginia to advocate at the state level for that to be allowed. With the tenants' rights, we know that Charlottesville is very limited in what it can do. And so throughout the tenants' rights recommendation sections, the recommendations are exclusively focused on where can the city use the funding that's it's already putting into housing projects to strengthen tenant protections? How can the city put funding in to help to reduce or mitigate evictions? And what issues can the state be advocating for? Can the city be advocating for at the state level to open up new opportunities to support tenants' rights over the long term? So that's the tenants' rights section. We really have been very thoughtful and tried to be very careful about not recommending anything that is not possible, and really focusing on what the city can do to advance tenants' rights and tenant protections in the near term, while thinking about some tools that you might want to have available in the longer term and how to advocate for those.
Lyle, what were you saying?
I've just been studying Berkeley history recently. They are similar to us in size and academic influence. They used to have rent control until the state shut it down.
Interesting. So what is the experience of places like Berkeley, New York, Washington with rent control? How do we keep the owners of these rent control units motivated to do the upkeep that they need to do to?
Is that a question for me? I'm sorry.
Sure, because yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly challenges. We didn't do detailed case studies about the right model that Charlottesville might want to approach, because we're not recommending that you pursue rent control in the near term. It's really about, as affordability continues to be a challenge, thinking about additional tools that might help to advance that. Now, I know there are certainly, in places like New York that have rent control, there are certainly rules about when units do turn over and the rents that can be increased. And it's been a program that's been in place for a long time, but I'm not prepared to speak in detail to how we would recommend that Charlottesville approach rent control, because we're not recommending that.
Why did California shut rent control down?
It was Costa-Hawkins. I think it was part of a larger issue. I haven't dug into it too much.
All right, well, yeah. Jenny, are you back?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. You're back. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks. So sorry, take us back just 1 second. So just to give you a picture of the next steps with this, in case that might feed in some of the questions. So we just presented this to you. We're going to present to council. I know some of you are on tonight, which is fine. We'll present a similar presentation next week during the 4 p.m. report section of the council meeting. And then the idea is on March 1st, we'll go back to council, and that would be the time we have scheduled now for council to potentially sort of endorse or approve of this concept. Because as I think Missy mentioned earlier in the meeting today, we sort of want to make sure there's agreement around these larger concepts before we incorporate them fully into the draft comprehensive plan. So once we have received sort of an endorsement or approval of this plan, we will be incorporating it into the comprehensive plan along with the other revisions that we'll be making. As part of that sort of revision to the comp plan, we're also meeting with you on the 23rd of this month, 5:30 to 7:30, to talk about the future land use map. Part of that, we'll be talking about some of the land use recommendations from the Affordable Housing Plan, as well as other land use changes. And then there will be a larger round of community engagement around the comprehensive plan in March or early April. And so that would be looking at how we've incorporated the Affordable Housing Plan, looking at the draft land use map and some other edits to chapters, hopefully. So that's the bigger picture. But for the Affordable Housing Plan piece, it's those next 2 meetings with council after this. So our goal tonight is to hear, again, see if there are specific things, you've already been mentioning some of them, that you might want us to bring up or flag for council in their review as well.
So, colleagues, any input? Just dive in if you have thoughts, please. Aurora, I knew you'd be the first to dive in. Go ahead.
Sure. So I just wanted to address some concerns that the HAC Policy Subcommittee brought forward at their meeting in November, December or something. Specifically, it was with the soft density provisions. And I spoke to some of the stakeholders involved after that meeting from Habitat and from LAGC. And so I think I have a better grasp of what they're really looking for now. And apologies to them if I get anything wrong, but I think their concern is that it's not that they don't, that they want to keep single family zoning by right and don't want to end exclusionary zoning in single family areas. It's that they would like there to be additional advantages given to affordable housing built in those exclusionary neighborhoods. And so that could be accomplished, not just by adding a couple extra units on top of whatever the new by right maximum will be, but also by adjusting setbacks or massing limits or parking requirements within those zones in ways that wouldn't necessarily apply to market rate housing, similar to Cambridge's affordable housing overlay. And maybe that's too in the weeds for this general plan and would be better for the comp plan and the zoning rewrite, but something to consider, I think, as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, that we definitely did hear those comments. Our response is that the specifics of the rezoning and the zoning changes should be left to the zoning code rewrite. Or potentially, there is a recommendation to develop an inclusionary zoning policy. That recommendation does focus on multifamily, but there's the potential, if it was determined that that was the correct avenue to make those kinds of changes, that in the design of that program, that it could be done. But we really see that as an implementation need and not sort of a strategic recommendation kind of a comment.
Gotcha. Thanks.
I just had a small thing to the question I emailed about IZ in multifamily versus all new development.
Right. So I think that if I can try to paraphrase the question is, should the IZ policy apply to all new development or should it apply to multifamily specifically? It's a good point. There's maybe some clarification, further clarification that can be done there. Again, I think there's, to a certain extent, it is left up to the design of the program. I mean, I think when we say as a portion of all new development, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a portion of each new development, right? Not to get too, but I think that there is, the intention is that there will be new development and some of it will be affordable, and that there should be a policy in place to determine exactly how much of it and how affordable and where. And that, we can talk about ways to clarify that language, but I think there is room for, again, the design of that particular program to figure out the right mechanism through which to do that.
As written, it is not clear to me.
Thank you.
Oh, and could I just ask for you guys to send that, the PowerPoint you just presented out with the changes in detail? That would be super helpful.
Yeah, I can send it out. It's also on the website, but I'm happy to send that
Cool.
out.
I can find it there. Thanks.
I mean, Lau, to your point, I think clarification, things like that, perfectly fine. If it makes sense to pass that along to council, we're certainly happy to, we, as I think the theme of my presentation just was, we want this to be clear what we're actually talking about, so.
Thank you.
Tania, do you have any input? I mean, you're always my comments when it comes to this. So do you have any thoughts?
No, not right off the top of my head at this particular point, but if I do, I'll definitely chime in.
Okay. Bill, you've been quiet most of the meeting. Any input?
No real input. I have to take a pretty deep dive into the housing plan, I think, and
yeah.
look forward to doing
I have to admit, I haven't been able to read the whole thing either. It's pretty,
and, especially focusing on those collaborations with the university, and I'll pass those on to Alice. I'm sure she's the architect for UVA and others. I'm sure they're already somewhat aware of those recommendations, but in case they aren't, I will push that up.
Cool.
Chain of command.
Very good.
Thanks.
Jody, anything?
No, nothing significant. I was pleased with the presentation by Sarah and the changes that have been made, and appreciate how they listened to our comments before. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Gary.
Yeah, I wanted to say the same thing, Sarah. It's obvious that you guys had your ears open, and the changes, reflect that. So thank you.
And Liz, anything new to add or?
Yeah, I do have a few things, comments, and then one of the questions in the packet was, keying up questions for us to consider as we talk about the land use map in the upcoming meetings. The summary, the community engagement and summary document states, one of the high points are stating concerns from the public. This is what the public heard. Concerns about potential impacts of land use recommendations on certain communities, including concerns about potential displacement. I don't think that the summary captured accurately or what showed up quite a lot in the meetings, and then also in some of the subsequent notes about the questions from the public about the risk of demolitions in neighborhoods, and specifically demolitions with the risk that homes are demoed and then larger single family, high end / i.e. at the end of the day, non-affordable housing be built. I'm seeing this happen in my neighborhood where an existing older home, which is serving a purpose in the affordable housing picture, was demoed to put up a massively out of scale and just really mansion in a kind of affordable working class neighborhood. So, this is just to reiterate the point that if an affordability requirement is not tied to these land use changes, that's what we will continue to see. And I really want to urge, everyone who's listening to be mindful of that. How do we incentivize? How do we ensure that what we're doing isn't actually working against what we're trying to achieve? And then, so for the land use map, I'm interested in understanding what the criteria will be for finding those areas appropriate for the soft zoning and the upzoning. Will that, how will historic districts come into that? If we're talking about historic districts, are we talking about ones that are nationally recognized as historic and therefore, but not under local designation and therefore not essentially protected? And then finally, I think in the subsidy slide, you could consider adding the rehabilitation tax credits as a possible avenue by which homeowners can take advantage of efforts to rehabilitate their house.
Okay. Thank you for those comments, Ms. Russell. I noted your comments about the community engagement summary. We'll see, that is a draft summary. We're happy to make clarifications in that if anything was not accurately represented. So I'll look into that. And then noted your comments for the land use map discussion on the 23rd, and then the subsidy comments. So thank you.
Jenny, this is your meeting, so what else do you need?
If there are no further general comments, I would note, as Ms. Russell just mentioned, we did also prompt that if there were specific aspects of the land use recommendations that you'd like to discuss when we get to the 23rd, we're happy to have you bring those up now, or feel free to send them to us this week as we're prepping those materials, which will go out in the packet next week. But otherwise, I think we just want to reconfirm that we have your comments to share with the council next week.
So
I think it's really, sorry, please.
I'm sorry, Chair. Jenny, so I wanted to ask about this upcoming work session and how you are planning for this to proceed. I mean, are you coming in, you meaning the Seville plans together, the consultants coming in with a recommended land use plan based upon your study and your research with the city over the last year? Or are you coming in with a bunch of plain map and a bunch of markers and expecting the planning commission to have at it again?
No, we've heard what you've done, what you've said before. We've heard what you've done previously, and we've looked at that extensively. So our plan right now, and again, we'll have more in the packet next week. We'll have a series of existing conditions just to get our heads all in it together. Some how the city's developed, a bit of that discussion, and then we will talk a bit about the existing small area plans that have been in place that aren't necessarily incorporated into zoning as of now, but have been added as an amendment to the comp plan. Things like, the SIA, Hydraulic 29 and whatnot. And then we'll talk about the affordable housing plan and the recommendations in that and how that may feed into this plan. And then we will present a framework concept to discuss. Obviously, if you do want to bring out the virtual markers and get into it, it's a work session, so we will invite that. But our intent is not to come with a blank map.
Good. Thank you. That sounds structured and what we need.
Great.
Thank you so much for asking that question, Jody, because we've been there. Lyle, I want to make sure you get a chance to chime in too, because I think you got a little frustrated with the way we're approaching the land use map as well. So if you can give these guys some coaching, that would be a great value.
Right now, or would this be a later thing? I think
Right now, if on top of your head, if there, I want to see us go through what we went through last week. On top of your head, if there are things that you want them to make sure that they do, it'd be good.
I'm a huge fan of Kurt Kieseker's work that he did after leaving the commission. I find that very helpful and inspiring. I think that's worth thinking about critically.
You need to help them understand who that was, so that
we've received all the materials that he worked with. Yeah. We are incorporated that a bit into the presentation. Yes.
Former planning commissioner did just a ton of work on the 2008 process, and for me, that the way I've been thinking about it, I find that very helpful. And just sort of how to put this.
Put it the way you're thinking. Don't be polite.
All right. So we have a legacy of exclusionary zoning, segregation. It's in the plan. It's there. Don't take for granted that those lines are good and helpful and meaningful. A lot of those are based in racial bias and aren't helpful moving forward. That's my big concern. I hope that helps.
Yeah.
It does, yes, thank you.
So this is going to be a pretty critical meeting because, again, this is where things fell apart before. So hoping that you guys can get us over this huge speed bump.
We hope so too.
And you know my mantra, so I won't repeat it, but let's just move this thing forward.
Yes.
Anything else, guys? I'm sorry, Jenny, please.
No, I was just gonna confirm. Anything else anyone want to reiterate?
Yeah, I'd just like to toss in one more thing as a potential funding strategy that I don't see in there. And I mean, I think it's essentially what Kathy Alvin used to talk about as a synthetic TIF, where you take some of the incremental revenue that comes from the new construction under these new, denser by right rules, and just redirect it or kind of earmark it straight into the Affordable Housing Fund. Sort of like we already earmark 40% of funding to go to the schools. So, you have 60% left that right now just goes in the general fund for council to do whatever. What if you took 30% of that and tossed it right into the CAF? And that way you're kind of better aligning the incentives. So, as those new, mansions go up in North Downtown, or better yet, a fourplex in North Downtown, as they go up, we get extra tax revenue from that additional construction and the, more expensive improvements from more homes, and kind of automatically direct that into the Affordable Housing Fund. And, to bring it back to our earlier discussion, I'm thinking about this project that's going to be coming up on Stribling. Not to pass any judgment on that project yet. It just keeps coming to my head as an example. It's 240 homes on a currently vacant parcel. that would eventually bring in, $500,000 a year in tax revenue. And we do want some sidewalk infrastructure to be built, and the proffer wouldn't quite cover it. But if you were to pass it, build the sidewalks, the tax revenue would pay for the sidewalks in 2 years. And then on top of that, the $500,000 is just gravy, just free money coming in to the city for not really having to provide any extra services. 40% would go to the schools. And then you could, in addition to the affordable housing we're going to get out of that project, from, in this case, it would be a proffer, and in the future, once everything's, good, it will be from inclusionary zoning. So in addition to that, you can take that incremental tax revenue and stick it, or some of the incremental tax revenue, and stick it right into the affordable housing fund, so that everybody benefits from the new construction.
Thanks, Rory. I know we did have a fairly extensive, or I remember that was brought up in one of the webinars, and there was a response given to that. So Sarah, would you want to respond to that, sort of summarizing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of a synthetic TIF has been brought up a couple of times. At the end of the day, it's still general funds. I mean, it's a nice way to talk about how we can fund affordable housing, but it's still general funds, and that is one of the sources that we've talked about. If that's something that has, great traction in terms of being able to allocate and pass that particular portion of general funds, then that's definitely something that can be pursued, but it's not a different funding source.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, well, that's true. Yeah, for sure. And of course, councils can't bind future councils, and any council can take it out and put it into, whatever they want, a nice fountain or something. But in my experience watching the council budget process, the power of defaults is very important. And so when the money gets automatically put into one pot and they'd have to, explicitly move to remove it and put it into another one, they become a lot more likely to leave it in that pot.
Sure.
And I guess I distinguish it from a necessarily synthetic TIF in that I wouldn't necessarily say base it in an area like the SIA proposed one, but just everywhere.
Okay, thanks, Rory. Other comments that you want to share now to be shared with council when we meet next week? Okay. Well,
after watching Tania yawn, I was like, I think we're reading the end of our bandwidth.
yes, that's certainly understandable.
Yes.
Well, I will say we'll be trying to summarize some of this in the materials for council, but if other things come up even outside of that, feel free to send them along to us or obviously to council, and we can share with them.
Question for Ms. Creasy. Are we able to join as people who watch the council meeting when they present this?
Sure, it's during the 4 o'clock report session on February 16th. So it's next Tuesday because of the Monday holiday.
Okay, so there's a link that we can go to that we can just kind of sign into, and we have to sign up to be added to the link, though, right?
Yes, you'll need to go to where I send you for packet material, and there'll be a link for the council meeting for the 4 o'clock session.
Yeah. So hopefully a few of you us guys can join and watch and see what happens.
Great. All right.
Oh, we're a wrap.
Well, thank you all for your comments on that and previously.
Thank you. Are we a wrap?
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Sarah.
It's a wrap from us.
Yeah. Is there anything else you guys would like to discuss? Is there a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Is there a second? We are adjourned. Mr. Rice, thank you for getting us through this. Ms. Creasy, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Have a good evening.
Lyle, great job, dude. Thanks.
Likewise, thank you.
Night.